Okay, so here's the thing. In this video, we're gonna design a website in Figma using auto layout, but we're gonna do it using a Bootstrap UI kit that you can download from the community for free. Now, all of the information of this video and the subsequent videos is in the description below. You can download it, you can have a look at the other videos. I'm also sharing how to develop the website. I'm sharing how to set up a Docker container, all the good stuff. I'm sharing it with you. Now, in this specific video, we are going to cover creating a responsive design, but specifically that by using Bootstrap framework. I'm also going to share my knowledge that I've gained in the past 15 years with you. That's going to not only speed up your process, but it's also going to help you to create a stunning design, a modern looking, great looking design. Now, this entire design, this entire development, all these videos, it's about creating a high performance website that loads fast, industry standard, so that when you right click, inspect element and go to Lighthouse, you're going to get a 100% mark or close to 100% mark on all of them. Now, what do you need to know? Well, HTML, CSS, SCSS, and a bit of typography and colors, that's a good base. But if you don't know any of it, that's fine. We'll go through all of it. I'm going to show you everything. Okay, so at the end of this video, you're going to understand basic design principles, not just for Bootstrap, but for all designs, for all website designs, mobile app designs. I'm going to share some key insightful information with you. We're going to create a website specifically for Bootstrap, so it's easy to move from design to development. As I said, we're going to work with a pre-made Bootstrap UI kit. And we're also going to go through just understanding and managing assets and components in Figma, because that's important, especially when we're going to move this design into development. Okay, so this is what we're going to design. We're going to design a yoga and fitness website. It's going to be an actual stunning website, a responsive website, a modern looking one that you can actually use. Again, in the description, you can download it, you can use it. It's yours, it's free. It's bonus content for that matter. Okay, so with that said, let's jump into it. I want you to grab a coffee, sit back, relax, go to Figma, create an account if you don't have one. It's free, you can use it. Let's get things going. Okay, so before we jump into this, before we go and open Figma and start designing and putting everything together, there's a few things that I want to share with you. A few things about Bootstrap itself. Now, you can skip this section. You can skip this little part if you already know this, if you're already familiar with Bootstrap, and if you're already familiar with how the breakpoints work, how the columns work, the rows and all that good stuff, the gutter space, you name it. If you're used to that, then move on to the next section. But for those that haven't worked with Bootstrap yet, or haven't worked with the frames yet, or a foundation or custom variables, let me just explain a few things with you. The first thing is Bootstrap is highly customizable, but there's a very specific way of how you customize Bootstrap. Because again, everything is about performance. Everything is about how quickly we can get that website to load. Key number one thing about Bootstrap: we want to avoid creating custom CSS classes at all costs. So we want to use variables and manipulate variables to get where we want to be. Now, why is that important when designing a website? Well, we need to know and understand how the variables work to make sure that we don't create custom classes. Okay, coming back to it. Bootstrap, super customizable, but the core focus is how can we create a website that's got a super small footprint? Because again, we want our Lighthouse to score close to 100%. We want this website to load quick. We want the actual size of the entire page to be less than 500 kilobytes. To achieve that, we need to use the variables. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about layout. Now, Bootstrap has containers. Everything is within containers. Now, you get two types of containers. You get container fluid and you get the traditional container. Container fluid means that we can use or utilize the entire space from left to right, the entire canvas, the entire web page from left to right. That's fluid. Bootstrap container, however, we can only use the actual center part. And normally for desktop, that's 1200 or around somewhere around there, 1200 pixels. But in essence, the container is everything that's within. Now, within the containers, you get rows. And for each row, you get columns, right? So you can have one column, two columns, or even 6 columns for that matter. And columns can stretch from 1 to 12. 1 being the smallest and 12 being the largest. So if I have a column that is, let's say 12, that will stretch the entire row and or container. If you, for example, want two columns side by side, you would use column 6 and column 6, which equals to a total of 12. And let's say you want three columns, now you're going to use column 4, 4, and 4, which equals to 12. The point that I'm trying to make is that everything needs to equal to 12. That's how the column system works in Bootstrap. Now, with the rows, with the containers, with the columns, there's also spacing and padding. So when we talk about spacing and padding and all that good stuff, we are referring to the actual space between different elements, but we're also talking about padding and margin. And as we go through this design, I'll explain to you in more detail how and why this part is important. Last but not least, and why Bootstrap is so powerful, is the actual breakpoints. You have predefined breakpoints that you can use: small screen, medium screen, large screen, extra large, and extra, extra large. And on top of that, you can also create your own custom breakpoints. And as we go through the development and as we actually take this design and move it to development, I'm actually going to show you how to do that the right way. Again, it's all about lean code. It's all about taking variables that already exist and we just modify it. Why? Small footprint. Okay, so on top of what I've already mentioned, there is typography. Typography is great because you can have anything from display 1, which is a huge font size, to display 6, which is much smaller, and everything in between. And you also get headings, heading 1 to heading 6, and you also get paragraphs, you get spans, you get, man, there's so many to it. But again, as we go through this design and as we go throughout the other videos, throughout the development process, I'm going to show you how exactly to use this to your benefit. Last but not least, you also get tables and forms and button groups. Super, super powerful. So again, Bootstrap is there. It's a great tool, but everything is already made. All the components are already there. You don't need to go and custom create it. It's already there. We just need to modify it, existing modifications, to get where we want. Again, and I know I sound like a broken record, take custom CSS, put it out of the window. Yes, you're still going to need it here and there, but the goal is to use as little as possible. And this is why we need to design the website to accommodate Bootstrap. Because if you design a website and you don't even think about Bootstrap, then your actual customizations are going to be super complicated. All right, so with that said, let's start the entire process. Okay, so now that we have the theory out of the way, we can start by going to the community and we are going to search for our Bootstrap UI kit. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that you are going to get a lot of results, but usually it's the first one. So I'm going to click on it and it's going to show us the thumbnail, which says Bootstrap 5 UI kit. And I'm going to open it up in my Figma. All right, so now that it's already loaded, you're going to see a couple of things. First off, you will be introduced to the thumbnail, which will obviously say Bootstrap 5 UI kit. But what I want you to do is double click on the name and we're just going to change this and we're going to remove community. Because if you open it up in Figma, it saves a local copy. Now, when I say local copy, I'm referring to it being in the cloud. I'm referring to it being on your actual user account. So now that we've renamed it to Bootstrap 5 UI Kit, and by the way, we're going to rename this later on as we progress through this design. But I want you to look at the left-hand side. You'll notice that we have a couple of pages here. We have thumbnail, foundation, components, UI kit, etc., etc. When you click on foundation, you're going to notice that we have a bunch of frames. And when we actually zoom into the frames, you'll see that these are all the fundamental items of Bootstrap itself. So we have colors, typography, as I've mentioned earlier. We have shadows, spacers, fonts, and so forth. The biggest thing that we're going to focus on for now, and in this part of the video, is focusing on the actual colors itself. I've already got a color space that I really like, and so we're going to use this green as our primary color. So I'm going to copy this green and we're going to navigate in, just have a look at the colors. Now there's a couple of ways to modify the colors, but the easiest way I normally find is on the right-hand side, you will see color styles and you'll see primary, secondary, and so forth. But I'm going to click on the primary, and the first color, which as it says color. I'm going to click on the little settings. We're going to edit the style, and I'm going to drop in that color that we just copied. And you'll notice that it will change the actual tab or the actual tile. But when I zoom out, you'll notice at the top, it will also change it as well. So everything is intertwined, which is great. I really like that. For now, I'm going to just change the primary color, but throughout the design, we're going to change a lot of these because personally, I feel like this color, which is success, and this color danger, warning, info, those are a little too harsh for what I'm trying to achieve here. So later on, we'll definitely go and change this. All right, so now the next step I want to do is I actually want to change the background color to something that I personally like. Now, this is a personal preference. I normally like something like this, which I can basically see the big difference between my actual frames and the background itself. Now, the next thing, we're actually going to start putting together the design itself. So I'm going to click on the little plus to add a new page, and we're just going to call this page homepage. And so we have the homepage. You can actually move it up to the top. And as that, I'm also going to delete the thumbnail because that's not really something that we're going to use. And same with the changelog and the icons itself. I personally don't like the icons. You can definitely use the icons if you want to, but I don't like it. I use a different plugin in Figma, and I will show you throughout this design which I use. All right, so going back to the homepage, the next step I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start adding my frames. So I'm going to click on the frame icon at the top left, and I'm going to start by dropping in a desktop. So I'm just going to drop in a random desktop. It doesn't really matter at this stage, but I'm going to call this one desktop view. And I'm just going to change the actual width to 1920. All right, perfect. So that is our desktop view. And so I want to do the same for tablet, and I want to do the same for mobile. So I'm just going to take the tablet here, I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to call it tablet view. Beautiful. And now I'm going to do the same for the mobile. All right, perfect. So now we have desktop, tablet, and we have mobile. Perfect. Now we can actually start putting things together. Okay, so now that we've created the frames, the next thing that we need to do is we actually need to activate auto layout. And we also need to add our container. So to do that, I am going to start with the desktop view, and we are going to activate auto layout. Now I'm going to do the same for tablet, and I'm going to do the same for mobile. You always want to use auto layout because it is so much easier to design with auto layout itself. All right, so now with auto layout activated, the next thing I want to do is actually create a container. Now, Bootstrap works with containers, and so we want to make sure that we stay within the bounds of a physical container itself. Now I'm going to click on the desktop view, and I want to make sure that auto layout is activated, which it is. That's good. And we are actually going to take a rectangle. I'm just going to drop it in. Now, when I have the rectangle activated, I want to make sure that the width of this rectangle is going to be the proper size. So I'm going to navigate over to Bootstrap documentation. And essentially what I did is I searched for container. So I'm going to redo it just to show you. And you're going to see that it takes you to this page. Now, when you are on this page, and I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm seeing, you're going to see that we have extra small, small, medium, large, and extra, extra large. Now, these are all the breakpoints that we've discussed earlier. And essentially, the breakpoints are just there for every time a screen size goes a certain width, it will adapt to whatever that breakpoint is. Just to add a little side note, we are going to create a video where we actually develop this. We'll definitely use the breakpoint. I'll show you in CSS SAS how to properly use that. But for now, because we are designing on an extra large screen, we are going to use the container XXL. So when I go to container XXL and I look at the extra large, we're going to see that our actual size for our container is 1320. I'm going to navigate back, and we're going to change this to 1320. Now that we have our actual container, I'm just going to change the actual height. We can just make it something like this, and I'm just going to make it red, and we can change the opacity a little bit. And so what I want to do is I want to center this guy at the top. And so now we have our bounds that we can use. Now, one thing you can do is you can open up Shift and R. You can open up your ruler, and you can just drag this on here to to make sure that we actually use this properly. Now that we have our container, the next thing I want to do is I want to select my container and I'm going to group it. And so I'm going to rename this to container. Once that is done, I am going to activate auto layout and we're going to make sure that this width is fixed to 1320. The height is not a problem. We can just leave it as it is. And so now we actually have our container inside our actual desktop view, which is perfect. Okay, so with that done, the first thing we need to do is actually add a little bit of space in the desktop view itself. And when I say space, I'm talking about padding. And I specifically want to add padding at the top and bottom. So I'm going to add 25 at the top and 25 at the bottom. And you're going to see that it's pushing down whatever is inside, which is fine. That's exactly what we want. And so here's another little trick that you can use to make sure that you stay within your container. You can also use the actual padding on the horizontal scale to actually make sure that you stay within the container. So you'll see you can increase this amount and you can match it with the actual container itself, which is great. So now you don't really need this guy because your auto layout is set to actually stay within this. So let's go ahead and hide our container. Okay, so with that done, the next step or the next thing I want to do is actually start with the navigation itself. So with that said, we're going to zoom in. We're going to start putting together the logo itself. Now, because this is just a demonstration, we are just going to use an icon. We're just going to put together a logo. So I'm going to click within my actual frame and I'm going to open up the actual plugins section of Figma itself. Now, remember earlier I said that I don't use the icons of Figma itself. And the reason for that is because I use a plugin called Iconify, which is a great plugin. And I'm going to go ahead and open that right now. Once I open that, I am actually going to search for fitness. Because this is a fitness website, I am just going to search for an icon that might work. Okay, so I personally really like this icon right here. And so when I click on it, it will push us down. And the next step says you can actually select the colors that you want it to be. Now you're going to notice that it also shows all the document colors. Now this is the same colors that we've set earlier on. So I'm going to select our actual primary color. And with that selected, we are going to stick with 25 pixels for now. And I'm going to import the icon itself. Now you're going to notice when you import the icon that it creates a separate frame, which I personally don't like. So I am going to click on it, not right click, and we're going to change it to group on the right hand side. Now it is a group, but you're going to notice that it dropped it right in the middle of our frame. So why is that? Well, the reason for it is because we're using auto layout. Okay, so before we change that, I'm just going to rename this actual group and I'm going to call it logo. And I want to actually add a text as well. And we're going to call this great fitness. I think that's a great name for what we're trying to achieve here and for what we're trying to design here. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I actually want to change the font of this. Now, when we change the font, we're actually going to select our text and we are going to click on the little text on the right-hand side. We're going to use that foundation of Bootstrap that's already inside of the UI kit. So we're going to play around here and we're going to look for a nice, good looking font that's actually going to work for our logo. Now, H6 looks pretty good. And if I zoom out, it's getting there. It's getting there. But I don't like the thickness of the font itself. So we definitely want to have a look at if there's any other type of options that we can play around with. And so I can see that we have bold, we have extra bold. And so really essentially, let's try and use base text. That is too thin. So when you're in situations like this, where you have a specific font in mind, or you have a specific thickness in mind, you want to detach it and you can manually go and change it. So I want it to be about semi-bold. I think that's a good size. The next thing though is you'll see that we have 16px and I want to make the line height 16px as well. When it comes to actual alignment, we want to make sure that it is closely to the font itself. Otherwise, your alignments are going to be incorrect. So with that done, we are going to select both the text and the icon, which I just did right here. And we're going to group this together, and I'm going to rename it to primary logo. You're going to see that I don't use any spacing. That again is a personal preference. Now with it renamed, we're actually going to activate auto layout, and I'm going to make sure that it is centered. And we can also change the spacing between the actual icon, but I feel like 10 for now is good. Okay, so now that we have the logo done, the next thing we need to do is actually get it to where we want it to be. With the actual container selected, we're actually going to drag this auto layout item, this primary logo, we're going to drag it inside of container. And when you've dragged it inside of container, and because we've hidden it earlier on in the video, we're actually going to unhide it, and we're going to hide the rectangle now. And I'm just going to rename the rectangle to base guidance. Okay, so now that we've renamed it, you're going to notice, because we've added it into the container, it's actually perfectly fit to where we want it to be. So when I zoom out, you can see that we didn't really do much to get it to this point, which is pretty good. I really like that. I really like that. All right, so now the primary logo is done. So the next steps we need to do, we actually need to start adding the menu itself. To add the menu, there are multiple ways of doing this. When you navigate over to Bootstrap UI Kit, one of the pages at the left, you'll notice that there is a navbar component already available for you to use. Now, personally, I don't use this. I don't like this navigation or navbar. I like to be a little bit more in control and custom when it comes to creating the navigation or the navbar itself. So with that said, we're going to navigate back to homepage, and we're going to put together a good looking navbar. So the first thing I want to do is I want to minimize primary logo and select container, take the text toolkit, and we're going to drop it into the actual frame itself and into the actual auto layout itself. Now with that dropped, I'm just going to type in home. We are going to make sure that it is set to the default font of the entire frame. So here you can see that it is using Roboto. The default for this entire UI kit, which you can change if you want to, is enter. All right, so now home is created. I'm actually going to take home and I'm going to duplicate it. And with it duplicated, I'm going to rename it, and we can call it services for that matter. And I'm going to duplicate it again, and we are going to call it our facility. Perfect. I'm going to duplicate it again. I'm going to say about, and I'm going to duplicate it one more time, and we're going to call it contact. So now we have a basic navigation structure. What I want to do is I want a drop-down arrow for services and a drop-down arrow for our facility. So to achieve that, we're going to select services, and I'm going to open up my plugins again. I'm going to open up Iconify, and this is why it's so powerful, and this is why I really like it. We're going to go ahead and search for arrow down. I'm going to see what options are available. Honestly, this is not what I'm looking for. So let's try carrot. That looks better. Okay, let's say carrot down and see what we have. Okay, this is getting closer. I really like this for now. So I'm going to select that, and I am going to change it to the default dark color, which I believe is this one right here. With that selected, it's 25, and we're going to import it right now. I'm going to close this guy down, and you're going to see that it imported it exactly where we don't want it, which is fine. But always remember, when you import an Iconify, we want to change the frame to group. And now we are just going to call it arrow down. Perfect. And I'm just going to move it to services. So now that it's moved to services, I'm actually going to duplicate it again, and we are going to put it next to our facility. The next step is I just want to make it a tiny bit smaller. So I'm going to actually constrain the properties, because if you don't do that and you start changing the width and the height, you are going to get a stretched result, which is definitely not what we want. So I'm going to constrain it. I'm going to change it to 16, and I'm going to do the same for the other arrow as well. We're going to constrain it and change it to 16. Perfect. So now that that is done, we're actually going to select arrow down and services. We're going to group it again, and we are going to rename it to services, and I'm going to activate auto layout. Next thing is I actually want to bring the arrow closer to services itself. So we're actually going to change the gap. Let's change it to 6. All right, let's go ahead and do the same for arrow down and our facility. Group it together. We're going to call it our facility. Oh, I don't like spaces. That is a development trait. Okay, perfect. So that is renamed. We're going to activate auto layout, and we're going to change this to 6. Okay, so now what I want to do is I just want to hit the play button real quick, and I want to see just super quickly how this all looks like so far. And you can always keep the preview mode open and ready. It's going to show it in a laptop view, which is, you can either like it or you hate it. I'm just going to leave it as is, but we can see that the arrow, in my opinion, needs to be a tiny bit smaller. I feel like it's too big right now. So I'm actually going to go back, and we're going to select our arrow, and I'm just going to make it 14. See how that looks like. Actually, let's make it 12. All right, so that's starting to look good. The next thing I want to do is click the actual auto layout of our facility. I'm just going to move this guy down. That looks better. That looks better. So basically what I did is I changed the align to be at the bottom center. So I'm going to go back to our preview mode and see, yeah, that is a little too small. And that's the thing about design, right? You always need to play around with items, with components, with icons, you name it, to get the actual result that you're looking for. So I'm going to go back to this arrow drop down, and let's change it to 14 and see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks perfect. That's exactly what I want. So let's do the same for the other one as well. So I'm going to click on services, open it up, select arrow down. We're going to change it to 14. And I'm also going to change the actual layout or the alignment to be bottom center. Okay, perfect. So now we have a basic menu structure. So the next step is to actually group this all together and get it to where we want it to be on the page itself. So to do that, I'm going to select all of our text and or group items, and I'm going to group it, and I'm just going to call it inner nav, and we're going to activate auto layout. Perfect. And now the next thing is I want to move the spacing a little bit. So let's try 25, and I'm just going to go back to preview mode. Yes, 25 looks good. I actually want to right align this navigation on the right hand side. So to do that, we're going to click on container here. We are going to change this little 10px gap. We're going to change it to auto, and it's going to move it to the right hand side. Go back to preview. Okay, so our preview is a little out for sure. So to fix this, and because we don't want to look at the laptop itself, we're actually going to navigate back to Figma. We're going to click on prototype. And when we click on prototype, we're actually going to, again, click on our layer itself, make sure that is selected. And I'm going to click on show property settings. You're going to see that it has device activated. So I'm just going to scroll up, and we're just going to deactivate that. We're going to say none. And when we navigate back, we're going to see a full view, which is exactly what we want. So now that we've figured that out, now that we have that done, I actually want to fine tune our menu items. So I'm going to go back, and we're going to zoom in. And what I want to do is I actually want to select the text items itself. Now, if you want to individually select the text items like this, you can hold in Shift and Control, or Command and Shift, or Control and Shift. And we're going to change this to medium. Okay, so now that it's changed to medium, I'm going to keep home on semi-bold because that indicates to the user that they are on that actual page. The next step I want to do is actually change the color of this entire thing. So we're going to select the inner nav, and we are going to, where it says selected colors, where it says 0000000, we're going to change this, and I want it to be a little lighter. That's too light for my preference. So we're going to scroll down, and we're going to look for a pre-made Bootstrap variable. So gray 800 might work. Let's go back to preview. That looks good for now. I really like that. But we got to do the same for the arrows itself. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because we can see here where it says selection colors, you're going to notice there's another color, and that color comes from our actual arrows, down arrows itself. So I'm actually going to change this to 800 as well. Perfect. Okay, so now when we go back, we can see, okay, cool. We have our navigation on the right-hand side and we have our logo on the left-hand side. So this is a good start. The next thing I want to do is actually add a button so that people can actually go to our store. So I'm going to go back and we are now going to start using the assets to achieve this. So I'm going to select the inner navigation or the inner nav auto layout. I'm going to go to assets and we're going to select the Bootstrap UI kit. And we're just going to see, okay, so the buttons are not there. We're going to look at foundation. It's not there. Components, buttons, perfect. It's right there. So what I'm going to do is select the button. And when you select the button, you're going to see it just says button, but you're going to also notice that it is the right color. So I'm going to drag this right here. When you drag it, by the way, you'll notice that it automatically puts it, does the alignment for you. Everything is done, which is great. Just want to make sure, yeah, it is an inner nav, which is perfect. And now I just want to go ahead and change the actual text of button, and we can just say shop now. Let's change it to shop now. Okay, so let's have a look. Now, a couple of things. This button is too big, so I'm going to make it a little smaller. To do that, on the right-hand side, you're going to see a couple of variables that we can change. And so I want to change this L to M, and let's have a look at that. Let's see how that looks like. That looks better. I just feel like we need to modify this a little bit. I feel like that text is a little too big. And again, we are using 16px. When I click on this text, it is also 16px, but it just looks a little off. So let's look at maybe changing the font size just a tiny bit for this button itself. So to do that, we are actually going to click on this button itself. Just going to make sure that I click on it, and we're going to click on this little triangle, and it's going to take us right to where the button is, which is right here. Okay, so now with that said, we're going to have a look at what is the actual items or what is the actual variables for this. So I'm going to click on the font itself. Let's see. Okay, so it has semi-bold and it's got 15px. Let's change this to 14px and see how that looks like. You're going to notice that it automatically changes everything for you, which is perfect. And you're going to see it's a little smaller. And I personally really like that. I like that look and feel. It's starting to look like a basic navigation. Okay, so one thing I want to add though, and so I'm going to go back to the homepage, and one thing I want to add is a little icon. So we are going to click on shop now, and we're going to click on plugins and iconify. I'm going to get that to open up, and I'm going to search for cart because I want to add a little cart. And so let's go for something like this. This looks different. I'm just going to insert it into our actual item itself. So let's take this and drag it in there. Okay, so now you're going to see that it dropped the icon, and it probably dropped it right there at the beginning, which is not what we want. We actually want to add it into the button itself. To do that, we're going to right click on the button, and we are actually going to detach the instance. And you're going to see that it changes it to a custom button. So I'm going to go back to the icon, and again, we need to change the frame to group, and we're going to take this and we're going to drag it in here. Now, the last thing, we just need to change it to, let's say light. Nope, that doesn't work for me. We're going to click that again, and let's look for white. Perfect. All right, let's have a look at preview. Okay, it's close. It's not there. I just want to go ahead and change the actual size. And to change that, we got to constrain the property, select the actual group. We're going to change this to 14. And we want to select button, and we want to make sure that the actual alignment is center. And when we look at the preview, perfect. It is getting closer. The last thing I want to do is just change the gap to maybe 10. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. That looks really good. So now we have a base navigation. The next step that we need to work on is actually start putting the slider together. And when I say slider, I'm essentially referring to the actual image in the background, the actual starting point of what people would see when they first go to this homepage. All right, so now that we've completed the main menu and or the navigation of a website, the next step is to focus on the actual slider. Now, as I said earlier, When I say slider, I'm referring to the first part of the website itself and the first part when you actually land on the homepage of your website. So what we're going to do now is we're going to minimize our container. And essentially what I want to do is I want to add a background image. So I'm going to take the rectangle tool and I'm actually just going to drag it onto our frame. And you're going to notice that it is pushing some of our navigation items to the right hand side. And the reason for that is because we have auto layout activated. So because this is going to be a background image, I'm actually going to use absolute positioning on this rectangle tool. So on the right hand side of Figma, you'll see a little button called absolute positioning. I'm essentially going to click that and I'm going to take this rectangle and I'm going to drag it to the full width and height of the frame itself. Now that that's done, we actually have the proper width and height. And I'm actually going to go ahead and add the background image. All assets and media items that I'm using in this course is located in the description below. So I'm going to go ahead and add my background image. Now that we've added our background image, we need to move this to the back so we can actually see our navigation menu. Perfect. Now that I've moved it to the back of the frame, we can actually start putting together the actual slide section of this website. To do that, I'm going to reuse some of the elements that we've already created. So I'm actually going to use this container. So I'm going to take the container and I'm literally going to hit Control D to duplicate it. Now, when you duplicate it, you're going to see that it's actually putting it on the right-hand side of our previous container. So to change that, we're first going to click on the desktop view frame and we're going to change the layout to vertical. Once you've done that, you're going to notice that it puts it right below, which is kind of what we want. Now, with that done, I'm actually going to open this container and we're going to change a few things around. First off, this specific container has 2 columns, which is what we're going to do next, not really needed. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the second column. When you do that, you're going to notice that it moves everything to the center of container. So to change that, we need to click on container and the right hand side, we are going to change auto to whatever the pixel amount is. When you do that, the actual alignment properties will adjust whatever you click on it. So if I click on the middle or right or left, you'll see that it moves whatever is inside, it will move it to that. Now that we've changed container, the next thing I want to do is actually regroup it. And the reason for that is because I want to make sure that my naming convention is correct. So I'm going to call this section 1. I'm also going to group this container and I'm going to call it nav. Again, naming convention can be completely up to you. It doesn't need to be a specific way. It's whatever works best for you. Okay, so now that we have section 1, we're actually going to start putting things together. The first thing I want to do is actually open up container and we're going to add an extra few things here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete the primary logo. And you can see we still have our guideline there, which is perfect. We can leave that for now. Just going to hide it. The next thing we need to do is take the text tool and we're actually going to drop it. For now, I'm just going to type in yoga. That's okay for now. But we're going to change the properties of this specific text. And I'm going to click on the little properties and we're going to go look for display. Now right here, I have display heading 1, which is part of the Bootstrap UI kit, by the way. I'm going to click it and it's actually going to change it for us. The next thing I want to do is also change the color. So I'm going to scroll down and I think I'm going to select gray 800. You know what? Let's change that. Let's make it gray 700. I'm going to navigate over to the preview and just have a look at what we have here. So we don't really have much right now. So we do need to play around with this for sure. All right, so another thing I'm going to teach you is using ChatGPT to actually generate content for you. Now, one thing I do want to add though, is you never want to use this content as is. The reason for that is for search engine optimization, where search engines can actually pick up if you use AI to generate your content. But it's a great tool for showcasing your design work and quickly showcasing your project sponsors, your developers, your managers, how and where things are going to be situated on the website itself. Now, back in the day, we used Lorem Ipsum, which was a great tool to use, or was a great way to use for that matter. But now that we have ChatGPT or any type of AI, it makes things a little better. So with that said, I'm actually going to open up ChatGPT. And with ChatGPT open, and by the way, I've got ChatGPT Plus or 4, which is 10 times better than 3. Trust me, I've been there. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, act as a marketing expert and create a homepage heading, subheading, and small paragraph for my yoga and fitness center in, let's say, LA. Keep it short and sweet. Now, first off the bat, the word elevate is a typical AI word. I never use the word elevate. No one ever uses the word elevate. So whenever you see the word elevate anywhere, you know that it is AI generated content. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this. I'm actually going to tell it to modify it a little bit. So I'm going to say, I want the heading to start with yoga and then fitness. Give me a few options. Okay, so now it gave us a few options and I really like it. I really like the second one. And another thing that I've noticed when using GPT or AI to generate website content, it always uses semicolons, which in reality, that is never used. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to navigate back and I'm going to drop it in here. And let's see if we can actually play around with this. So now we have yoga first, fitness always. And I'm actually going to put fitness always on a separate line. And the next thing I want to do is I actually want to detach this display because I want to make it uppercase and see how that would look like. I also want to change the bold to medium. And we probably want to change the line height so that it has a little bit more space for us to play around with. So I'm actually going to put it about there. And I'm actually going to remove this comma. Because this is a heading, you have a little bit more freedom when it comes to grammar or spelling. So it's getting there, but I feel like our space is too much. So I'm going to decrease this back to 80, have a peek at how that looks like. And you know what? I'm actually going to go back to either semi-bold or bold itself. So I like this. I'm actually going to decrease the font size to 60. And before I do that, I just want to see if display 2 might work for us. So display 2 is 64. So I'm going to detach it. I'm going to use display 2 just because we want to stick to Bootstrap and everything Bootstrap as close as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and make the changes that I did. Let's have a look at this. All right, I really like bold now. Now that we have this actual font size, I think this would work for what we're trying to do. But again, when designing a website, there's constant changes. You're constantly making adaptive changes. All right, so now that we have yoga first, fitness always, the next thing I want to do is actually click on the text itself. I want to make sure that auto width is selected. So in this case, it definitely is. So we are good to go. The next thing is we want to make section 1 an auto layout property. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And with that done, we have section 1, we have container. So everything looks like we're at a good start here. The next thing I want to do is actually add a paragraph. So I'm going to take my text tool, and I'm just going to drop it there. I'm going to type whatever for now. I'm going to navigate back to ChatGPT and let's see what this paragraph says. Welcome to your center's name, Los Angeles Premier. Perfect, that is fine. We're just going to copy it. Again, this is just for design purposes. It's not the actual copy of the website itself. So before I paste it in here, I just want to change the properties to paragraph. So we're going to scroll down. And let's see, let's start with base. I'm going to take it and I'm just going to put it inside of the container. And one thing I want to change is instead of it being next to each other, the layout, we are actually going to say vertical layout. And with that, I'm just going to move the paragraph down. I'm going to paste in our paragraph copy. Now, you're going to notice that it puts everything on one line. So to get past that, we need to detach. And with it detached, I'm just going to zoom out. And let's see what happens if I make this smaller. Perfect. So in actual fact, I don't need to detach from the base. So I'm actually going to go back and reuse the base again. And let's see how this looks like. So it's getting closer. It's getting to a point where it might look like something. The next thing is I want to obviously change the color. I want to select perhaps gray 700 to see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. The next step I want to do is actually take our section. I'm I'm going to take this section and give it a custom height, or a fixed height for that matter. I'm going to drag this guy down to about here. And I'm going to take the actual alignment, I'm going to put it in the center left so it moves everything down. Now I can actually adjust my height to get this where I want it to be. So I feel like there should be a good spot for it to be for now. The next thing is I want to add a button before we do anything else. So I am going to go to my assets. I'm going to take a button and we're going to drop it in here. And as you always drop things in, it's not always going to put it where you want it, but in this case, it looks like it did. With that, the next thing I want to do is move around or modify the spacing between the heading, the paragraph, and the button. Now, when it comes to adjusting the spacing between the heading, the paragraph, and the button, there's a few things you need to know. First off, when you work with font, you're not always going to have an absolute height. And the reason for that is when you click on it, you'll notice that it has a bit of space at the bottom and a bit of space at the top. So if you're like me, an absolute designer, something like this is definitely going to bug you. So to get past that, one thing you can do is you can navigate to the right-hand side and you can say align middle for both the heading and the paragraph. So once that's done, we're going to take this and we're going to move it to a point where it's nice and snug like that. Do the same for the paragraph itself. And the reason we're doing that is so that we can have absolute spacing between these items. Now with that done, I'm going to go back to the container and I'm going to change the gap. So let's say 35. You know what? Let's work on 48. So that will be spacing 5 in Bootstrap. So when we go to the Bootstrap documentation and we type in spacing, you'll notice that we have spacing 0 to spacing 5. And if you convert this from the actual base rem, that is 48. So going back to the design, I'm going to preview this. It's getting there. It's looking like something. We just need to fine tune it because obviously it's off aligned at this stage. So the next thing I want to do is get our container to be right where we want it to be. So I'm going to go back to this section and I'm going to adjust our section a bit so that we can move it to where I want it to be. Now, obviously there's different ways of doing this. I like to be in a little bit more control when it comes to the actual movement of my text. There we go. I like this. The only thing I would like to change is detach from the base. We're actually going to change the line height to 34. And when I do that, I need to change the height, adjust the height as well. And let's see how that looks like. There we go. Now we're looking like something. All right, perfect. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I want to work on this button. So I'm going to change the text within. So let's change it to book a session. I just want to hit preview mode and have a look. I'm actually going to take this button and I'm going to group it. And the reason I'm grouping that is because I'm going to activate auto layout on this. We're going to make sure that vertical layout is set to horizontal layout. And I am going to take this button and duplicate it. Now, once the button is duplicated, I'm going to change it to outline. I'm going to see how that looks like. Definitely not what I want. Let's double click on that and let's see what happens if soft is selected. No, that's not what I want. So in this case, I'm going to go back to full and I am going to right click and I'm going to detach this instance. With it detached, I'm going to remove the color. And with it removed, I'm going to click on button itself on the left-hand side. I'm going to change this to contact us. And last but not least, I'm going to change the color. We're going to select 800. When I go back, yeah, that looks pretty cool. Now, the last thing I want to do is just add an icon next to contact us. So I'm going to click on the actual text, open up our plugin, Iconify. And once it's open, I'm going to look for arrow right. Again, these are not the arrows I'm looking for. So let's add caret. Let's see if that helps. No, it doesn't. So caret, let's just type that in, see what we get. I'm actually going to search for caret right. Let's see if that helps. There we go. That's what I'm looking for, is that icon right there. And we're just going to make sure it's 25. That's fine. We can import it. We can modify it once it's imported. And I just want to change again, comes in as a frame. I'm just going to change it as a group. I'm going to minimize this. I'm just going to drag it down. And I think we are there. All right, so now we just want to change the spacing a little bit between the items. So I'm going to change that to 12. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I like where we're going with this. Again, we're going to modify this as we go. But one thing I quickly want to do is just change this to grade fitness. Okay, so now that we've changed this up, we've essentially created a beautiful looking slide section. We can definitely modify this and improve this and make it better as we go through the entire process. All right, so that's the slide section. The last thing I want to do is just modify the image a little bit. And when I say modify, I'm just going to move it up a little bit. I feel like your hand is cutting off here at the bottom. So I just want to improve that a little bit. So I'm going to go back to our rectangle one, change the wording to background. And I'm just going to move her up a tiny bit. So to do that, we're going to change the full to crop. You're going to hold in shift and you're just slightly going to move up the image. I don't want to do this much because I don't want her to cut into the text and I want the spacing between her and the text to still be consistent. Perfect. Let's look at our demo. That looks pretty good. Getting to a point, again, we're going to modify this as we go through this entire video. I feel like it's not 100% there yet, but it's a good start. The next section we're going to work on is the actual services section. All right, so now that we've completed our slider section and our navigation section, and by the way, when I say completed, it doesn't mean we are absolutely done with it. We'll still constantly make a few changes throughout the video. But with that said, what I want to do now is I actually want to create different variations. So let's go ahead and zoom out. I'm going to take tablet view and mobile. I'm going to hold in shift and I'm just going to move it to the right hand side. I'm going to click on desktop view, do the same, but I'm just going to move it to the left. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to create or duplicate what we have already created, because later on in the video, we are going to create a different variation of this. A good tip I can give you is always have multiple variations. And I found, in my personal opinion, that creating sections in their own frames make it so much easier to create different variations. So with that, I'm going to change desktop view to slider -01, and I'm going to do the same with this one. I'm going to say slider -02. Now, we're just going to leave the slider as is. Later on in the video, we'll make a few changes as we wrap up this design. All right, so let's jump into creating the services. So I'm going to take my frame tool and I'm going to drop it onto the artboard. I'm going to make sure that the width is 1920. So on the right hand side, we can see it's 1920. The height at this point, we don't need to worry about it. Why? Because we are going to use auto layout. So I'm just going to rename this frame 1 to our services. Obviously, we're probably going to change the naming later on in the video. But now with that done, we're going to zoom in and we're going to have a look at this. So first thing I want to do, I'm going to click on our services and I'm going to activate auto layout. Now you're going to see that it says hug. At this point, that's all right. But I want to make sure that on the right hand side, I set a fixed on 1920 because I don't want to start designing and the width gets impacted. Now with our auto layout set in our services, we got to create a container again. Now you can go ahead, go back and copy the container and put it into this frame, but let's create it from scratch. So with our services selected, I want to add a little bit of padding at the top and bottom. So I'm going to go with 96. And I'm going to explain why I'm going with 96. When we navigate back to the Bootstrap and we go and have a look at spacing, you'll notice that Bootstrap does come, and I think I've mentioned this earlier in the video, it does come with pre-baked, pre-made spacing that can be used. And it can be used in margin, it can be used in padding, and so forth. So by default, you have number 5, which in our case would be PY5. So when I go back here and we look at the padding that we set, we would, for example, set it as PY5. But we won't use 5 because 5 is actually 48 pixels. So how do I measure that? Well, when you look at this, it says spacer times 3. So spacer is normally default 16px, which is 1 rem. So if you open up a calculator and go 16 times 3, it comes down to 48. Once we start developing this website, I'll show you how you can actually add an extra spacing in the variables itself. So in our case, what we'll do is we'll add a spacing number 6, and instead of multiplying it by 3, we will multiply it by 6, thus giving us a total amount of 96 because it's 48 plus 48. So coming back to our design, I like big spaces between sections. This is why I've specifically selected 96. All right, so now that we have padding top and padding bottom set to 96, we are going to reuse the container we already created. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my slider one and I'm literally going to copy the container. Once I've hit Control C, I'm going to navigate to our services and we're literally going to paste it in there. I normally use Control V to do that. Now with that done, we can actually clean out the container and add a few rows and columns. Now in this part of the video, we're starting to use the rows and columns. So with that said, I'm going to take all this and I'm going to clear it all out. Okay, that's nice and clean. And with that done, we are going to take the text tool and we're going to drop it in. Now I'm going to add a heading and subheading. Now notice as I'm adding stuff, the height is constantly changing, and it's because, like I mentioned, it is set to hug. I'm going to type in our services. You're going to notice that it's all uppercase. I'm just going to change that. I'm going to turn off the uppercase feature so that we can see our services. So with that, I'm going to hit Control D and we're just going to say subheading to explain more. Now with that done, we just need to go and set the styling. So I'm going to click on our services and I'm going to select the properties. Let's go and select heading 1. Let's see how that looks like. That's a little too small for my taste. I'm going to detach that and let's see how display 4 might look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I like that. Let's go and change the color. So exactly the same how we've done it in the previous part of the video. So I'm going to set that to gray 800 and we are pretty much going to do the same for the subheading. So navigating. I normally like to use body base for subheading. If you feel like that's too small, you can definitely change that. All right, with that done, I'm going to select both of them and I'm going to regroup them. Call this heading. With that done, I am going to navigate to the right-hand side, select auto layout, and we're going to change the gap to 0. Last but not least, I'm going to take this heading and I'm going to group it again and we're going to call it row. Now we actually starting to use the rows and columns of Bootstrap, part of our design. All right, so with row selected, I am going to change the width from fixed to full, the actual container, because this is basically what a row would do in a Bootstrap scenario. With that, I'm also going to activate auto layout and I am going to set the alignment to center. Now you're going to notice that it doesn't do anything at this stage. We just got to go to our heading, click on the actual heading auto layout, and we want to change this fixed to hug. And once you've done that, you'll see that everything is in the center. But we're not finished here yet. So I just want to center this and there we go. That's looking good. Last thing, and this is just my personal preference, I want to zoom in and do the same as what we did with the previous font. I just want to make this a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to bring this up a little bit, get rid of that extra spacing. Go to the heading, make sure I've selected the heading on the left-hand side. Just going to add the proper spacing, which in this case is going to be 12. All right, so let's zoom out. I'm going to look at preview and just click the arrow on the right-hand side. And there we go. We're starting to create something here. Okay, so heading is completed. I'm going to right-click and we're going to create a component for this. When we navigate back to assets and we scroll down, we'll see under homepage, we have our heading already made for us. We can reuse this entire container and the row for our heading. And because the headings are always going to be centered, it's always going to be in this kind of layout, this should be fine. All right, so now that we're done with the heading, I'm going to go back to section 1. I'm going to copy this container, go back to our services. I'm going to paste that in. And you're going to notice that it puts it side by side. So we just got to click on the auto layout of the frame itself. We've got to change the orientation. So with that, I'm also just going to add a bit of spacing gap. So I'm going to make it 45, which is going to be spacing number 5 in Bootstrap itself. And we're just going to clean out this container. I'm going to start from scratch. The next step is we need to add the services. So to do that, we are going to start with an icon. So I'm going to click on the container. I'm going to open up plugins and we're going to open up Iconify. And once that's open, we're going to start adding our first service. So our first service is going to be spa area. So let's see what happens if we type in spa. All right, looking at these icons, I like the first one. First one looks good. I'm just going to import it right here. And as I imported it, going to change the frame to group. It is selected as group. And now I am going to increase the actual width and height. Now I did select the constraint properties. I want to make this bigger. So I'm just checking the actual size of our icon by going back and forth in preview mode. Just want to increase this to perhaps 80 and see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. And now with that done, I'm going to change the color. And with this, I'm going to change it to our primary color. Let's go back to preview and see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. Now with that done, I'm going to take the text tool and we're going to drop that in as well. And I'm just going to type out spa area. Now with that done, I'm going to select the text and we are going to add a property to it. I feel like that is a little too big. I'm just going to change that to maybe heading 5, see how that looks like. Too small, so let's go for heading 4. All right, now we just need to change the color. I'm going to stick with 800. With the heading styled in, we are going to add a little bit of paragraph text. So I'm going to hit the text tool, just going to drop it in wherever. Just going to do that for now. And I'm going to select it. And we are going to change the properties to base. Just going to move this down. And so with it being there, I'm going to use a plugin and we're going to add lorem ipsum. I'm going to do this because I don't want the video to end up being 5 hours, rather be it a little shorter. So with this plugin selected, I am going to select paragraph. And let's make 1 paragraph and generate it. Beautiful. I'm going to zoom out because it did create a lot here. And we're just going to change this to fixed. Let's make it 200. Zoom in. We're just going to trim this down a little bit. Select this, just get it down. Okay, with that done, we now have our icon, we have our heading, and we have our paragraph copy. Okay, now that we have these items, we actually need to let it look like something. So I'm going to extend it a little bit, and I'm going to change the alignment to center. Then I'm going to take the icon and the heading, I'm going to group it again, and we are going to call it Service Spa. I'm going to add auto layout, I'm going to center it, and I'm going to decrease the gap. Let's just change it to 35 for now. I'm going to have a look at the preview. It's getting closer. Now I'm going to take the actual heading and paragraph and regroup it. And the reason I'm doing this is because you can actually set a different gap when activating auto layout. So I'm just going to change the naming convention to content, add auto layout, and let's change this to be 15. All right, so now with that done, I'm going to go back to Service Spa. I'm going to add a full. We are going to use a nice little gray full. So maybe 300, that's too much. Change that to 200, too much. Let's see how 100 looks like. That's too light. So let's go for 200. Now with that done, we're adding a bit of padding. So I'm going to add 35 by 35. Have a quick look how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. And now last but not least, I'm going to give it a rounded finish. And there we go. We have our first tile. Just want to add a component to this. I'm going to add a button. I'm going to select our service bar, go to assets. I'm going to drag in a button. All right. I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to say learn more. I want to see if we have any specific options for our buttons. I'm just going to play around with this a little bit. I'm going to go with medium so it's a little smaller. So have a peek. Yes, that looks good. And we just want to see if there's an outline version, perhaps. Okay, so that doesn't look good. So we definitely want to modify this because this is what we want, but not exactly what we want. So I'm going to click on the button on the left-hand side, and we're going to click on Go to Main Component, which is going to navigate us back to components. We're just going to modify this guy. So first off, I'm going to change the color. I'm going to change this to primary. Next, I want to change this background. I want to remove the background. There we go. Now, when we look at the preview, it's looking like something I want. I just feel like I can increase the actual border a little bit more because the border is quite thin on the button itself. Doing that, we're going to look at the border properties here on the right-hand side. I'm going to change it to 2 and see how that looks like. I'm going to Let's see if I can actually decrease this font. Maybe that will work just a slight bit. I want a more realistic view, so I'm just going to say full screen. There we go. All right. One thing I do want to change is the actual roundness. So let's change the roundness to 8. A little bit more, maybe 12. Too much. Let's go for 10. Let's go halfway. There we go. Okay, last but not least, I just want to change the actual spacing. So I'm going to go back to my home page. I don't like the spacing in between here. So again, just to get rid of the top and bottom of the actual text itself, I'm just going to decrease this a little bit. And let's see if we can increase this to 25. Not exactly what I want yet. I'm going to group the button and the paragraph. I'm going to auto layout this guy again, and we can change this to 35 and see how that looks like. There we go. All right, so now that we have the first tile, we can literally just take this and copy it. I'm going to zoom out. Before we do this, I'm going to make this another component. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create component. I'm just going to have a look at our assets. You're going to see that it's right here. So now with that being another component, we need to add a row to this. I'm going to take this, group it again, change it to row, add auto layout to row, change the width to full. So now we're getting closer. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have two options here. We can either take service bar, hit Control D, and duplicate it. And you're going to see that it puts it next to each other. The other option is you can go to assets and you can drop it in as well. So it's completely up to you. I normally just do the whole duplicate thing. It saves a lot of time and effort. So I'm just going to create 3 of them. And we're just going to, within the row, add the spacing. We're going to change it to 48. See how that looks like. All right, so now one thing I want to do is I actually want 4 boxes instead of 3. To do that, we're going to take our actual first one. We're going to duplicate it again. You're going to notice when you do that, that it's going past our container. So this is not ideal. So we need to modify it a little bit. So to do that, we're going to select all of them at once and we're going to change the HUD to full container. And there we go. By changing it to full content, it will mathematically and strategically set the width for everything to fit within the container itself. So that's what we want. All right, now I'm going to adjust the actual roundness. I feel it's too much. So with that, I'm going to select all of them. I'm just going to decrease this perhaps to 30. There we go. It looks good. All right, so now we can go in and change some of the other headings as well. So I'm going to say changing room on this one. Let's change this one to free lessons. Oh, that's a spelling mistake for sure. Let's change this one to free rugs. All right, now with that done, we need to change the icons. I'm going to go within, open up Iconify again. Clean this out. It should be at the top here. There we go. Type in rest. Yeah, I don't like any of those. Toilet maybe. Yeah, that looks good. I'm going to take that one, import it. Now, it's not importing where I want it to be. I'm just going to close this guy real quick, change this to group. And for us to get this in here, you can't literally drag it in. You'll see it won't allow you to do that. And the reason for that is because it's set as a component. So we need to select this changing room and we just need to detach instance. We're going to do that for all of them. Okay, and I'm going to take my icon, cut it, select this icon, minimize everything within that group, and we're going to paste in our new icon. Okay, last but not least, we just want to move this guy up. Now, I'm going to constrain properties, and we need to change it so that it matches the rest of them. One little tip I can give you is you always want to make sure that your height of your icon is set the same as the rest of them. Because icons have different widths and heights, I normally set and manage it based on the height. There we go. Have a look at preview. Just need to change the full to our color. Looking good. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them as well. So I encourage you to select your own icon. So while I do this, go ahead and play around and select your own icon. Okay, so I made a few adjustments to my icons. And one thing I did was I changed the spa area. Instead of it being a full, I changed it to being a stroke. I also didn't like the toilet that we added, so I changed that to a better icon. Again, this is all about you playing around with icons in that iconify and find something that really works for you. I also added this beautiful icon that's just showing the rugs itself. So with that said, we are super close to our services section. I want to, however, make a few adjustments. And this is also part of you learning and me teaching you a few cool stuff. So first off, I'm not a fan of this gray. And it looked great when we started with it, but as I was designing, I really just didn't like it. So we're going to change that. We're going to change that up so that it really matches well with our slide colors and with our primary colors. So to do that, I am going to select our surfaces here, and we're going to change this gray. We're going to change it from 200 to light. Obviously, that's not the color we want, but we're going to go to foundation and we're going to change this up a little bit. Now, I've selected light as a color, so I want to zoom in and I want to look at the light option. So when I zoom this out a little bit and just look at everything, I believe that it's going to be this color. So I'm going to select it and we're going to click on the color itself. We're going to click on the settings. And over here, we are going to paste the color that I want. Awesome. I'm going to navigate back to my homepage and let's see if that adapted. Just going to zoom in and there we go. It changed from that gray to a more pleasing light color. Okay, so now with this done, I just want to hit the preview button. I want to get that opened up. Just going to move my arrows to the right here. Click on the arrow right. It's looking better. I really like this color. It really fits well with the green as a primary color that we've selected. I want to make a few changes. So I want to navigate back. And what I want to do is I want to add a couple of arrows here on the bottom right side of the actual services section. But I'm also going to create that effect where the tile is cutting off into the side of the services section. So really giving the user the idea that they can scroll to the right. To do that, we're going to select all of the services on the left-hand side, all 4 of them. We're going to change the width full to fixed width. And once we've done that, we're literally going to take the first service option and we're going to control and duplicate it. Now you're going to see that it's basically duplicating it, putting it right next to it. But we're going to select row and we're going to change the actual alignment to be left. And once you've done that, you'll see that it's cutting off one of them. It's kind of what I'm looking for right now. With this done, I want to take this row and we're going to duplicate it. We're going to open it up and I'm just going to clean everything out that's within it. Now we have a clean row to work with. Now with this row being clean, I'm going to add a couple of icons in here. The icons that I want to go for is left and right. So I'm going to start with arrow left. Look for something that I want. Actually want this one. So we're going to import it. That looks good. We're going to change the frame to group. I'm just going to increase it because when I look at it, it's pretty small. So I'm just going to constrain the properties. Maybe change it to 50. Let's see how 50 looks like. That's too big. Maybe change it to 45. Now with that, I'm also going to change the color of the full itself. I'm going to change it to the primary color. Now that we've done that, we're going to select the icon on the left-hand side. We're going to hit Control D. We're going to duplicate it. All we're going to do is literally just change the orientation of this. So we're just going to change it to 180. Perfect. So now we have 2 arrows, one going left, one going right. I'm going to group these two. I'm going to activate auto layout again, but I'm going to decrease the gap to 25. And in the row container, we're going to move this to the right-hand side. So let's see how this looks like. Looks pretty good. I want to add a little bit of a opacity to them, just so it kind of blends in a little more. So I'm going to select those two. We're just going to let's add 50. That's too much. Let's go for 75. There we go. Okay. One thing I want to do, just want to rename this real quick. go for arrow left and arrow right. Okay, that is done. So now what we've done is we've created this effect where it's cutting off on the side, letting the user know that there's more to it. But now we have duplicated items here. So obviously this is not going to work. Let's go ahead and change this one to something else, something more creative. To do that, we're going to go back and modify one of these services. So obviously I can't modify the first one because that's the main component or the main asset. But we can definitely modify the second one. So I'm going to click on the second one. We're going to detach the instance. And once I've done that, we're going to move this guy to being the first one. And now we can start modifying it. I'm going to start with the actual background itself. I'm going to detach the actual color that we've already selected. And we are going to select primary color. With that, I am going to select both the heading and text. We are going to choose gray 100. I'm going to do the same for the button here at the bottom as well. Select this button. Probably going to need to detach it. Let's see. There we go. Didn't even need to detach it. So that looks a little different, but we're not there yet. So let's change this spot area to something else. Let's say get started with your free trial. Okay, with that done, I just want to center line it. And so now I want to perhaps increase this font. So instead of using H4, let's try H3. With that, I just want to change the actual width of this to make it full. And let's just remove this extra return that I added. Now with this done, I'm going to take the icon. Let's just look for that. I'm just going to remove it. So this looks different, but obviously doesn't look great at this stage. So let's see if we can change this up a little bit. I'm going to select this actual service. I'm going to increase the padding top and padding bottom so it's a little bigger. Let's see how that looks like. Getting closer. Last thing I want to do is just add a little bit more spacing. So I'm going to change this to 35. For this one, change it to 45. Let's see how that looks like. Last but not least, I'm going to change learn more to get started today, giving it a little bit of a call to action for the user. Let's change this button to be a bit of a bigger button. I'm going to change medium to large. And again, it's going to change to the actual properties of the other button. Just want to change this to our primary color. Okay, so we are getting closer. The only thing I want to do is increase the width a little bit. So maybe let's make it 350. There we go, getting closer. Now, one thing I do want to add is perhaps a shadow. Maybe a good shadow would really fit this well. I'm going to select the service. I'm going to go to plugins, and there's a great plugin I use called Shadow Maker, which makes quite a good shadow overall. All right, so with this open, I'm going to change the shadow to this side about. Let's just see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to up the opacity very slightly. Don't want this. See, the problem here with using the shadow is it's not blending well with the color on the other service option. So I'm going to see if we can move the shadow to this side, see if that works. Yeah, that works pretty well. Just going to fine tune it a little bit. So maybe move it down to about over there. Yeah, that looks good. So I'm just going to apply that. Now we have our services section. It looks pretty cool. Looks pretty cool. Now, one thing that is bugging me is this arrows over here on the right hand side. I feel like it's just floating. It's not really at a proper spot. So I'm going to take this, take the row that it's within, and we are going to move it outside of the container. I'm just going to move it just to there for now and move it down. That didn't really do anything. So the reason for that is because of the padding we originally set up for the frame. So I'm just going to decrease the actual padding on the x-axis, change it to 48, 48 being spacing number 5 on Bootstrap. That looks already a lot better. I'm going to change the last arrow to 100%, and you'll notice that it's a constantly back and forth. Then you change this, then you change that. That's normal. That's part of designing a website. Okay, so it looks pretty good. Just want to see if the actual spacing, yeah, the spacing looks good. Gives the user the ability to see that the actual tile or our service is cutting off, and we have an arrow here for them to move to the right. We also have a get started today free trial kind of call to action. That's the thing when you design a website, you always need to focus on the call to action of anything. It's about user experience at the end of the day. That's why we design websites. Now, I want to add though, throughout this video, later on, we're still going to make a lot of changes. We're still going to make changes to the heading. We're still going to make changes to this heading. And I might actually add a different font because I'm not in love with this font. I don't feel like this font represents this yoga studio. Okay, so to get a close view to what we've already created, we can actually take this frame and just move it up just to see how this would look like together. And it's starting to look like something. It's starting to kind of fit to what we want. All right, so next up, we are going to create a our classes section. So we're going to add a few great images and we're going to add a tab, like the tab system of Bootstrap. It's going to be fun. So let's jump into it. All right, so in this part of the video, we're going to focus on creating a Bootstrap tab system. And we are going to basically create a section where we can showcase all the different classes available at our fitness or yoga center. Previously, we took our services and we moved it to the top here to basically have a look at what we are doing and just have an overall look. So I'm going to undo this by clicking on the frame itself, holding in Shift and moving it down. Now, there is theory to my madness. There's a reason why I'm using different frames for each section. And later on in the video, I will explain exactly why I'm doing this. And also, at the end of the video, when we are fine-tuning everything, maybe changing fonts, fine-tuning buttons, we'll take all these sections, all these frames, and we will put it together into one beautiful frame layout. Furthermore, we'll also use this to create our tablet and mobile, but we'll definitely do that later on. To get started with the actual Bootstrap tab system, I'm going to go ahead and use our frame tool and drag it onto our artboard. Make sure it's 1920, and the height, as always, it is not that important. I'm going to rename this to classes and perhaps use classes section. With that done, I'm going to activate auto layout. And as always, we want to make sure we use fixed width. We don't want to use hug because every time when we drag something in, it's going to affect the actual width. Next thing is I'm going to navigate to our services and I'm going to reuse the container and perhaps the heading because we probably need it. So I'm going to take the container, I'm going to copy it, put it in classes and drop it in. Now you're going to notice, as always, because the height is set to hug, our classes section's height is adjusting based on the content within. But again, this is on the left-hand side, so we need to make sure that it's in the center by just centering it. Also going to add a little bit of padding at the top and bottom, and I'm going with 96. All right, so with that done, we are going to rename this. I'm going to rename it to latest classes. Now you'll notice that it actually stretched into 2 lines. The reason for that is because we need to actually adjust the width of the heading itself. So currently right now, when I click on the heading, you will see that we have our services. It's called our services. So we're just going to rename this real quick. Latest classes. But you're going to notice that it's set to fixed. So I'm going to say hug contents. Once you've done that, it adjusted it to what we need. Alternatively, if you don't want to use this heading, you can definitely delete this, go to assets, the assets that we already created, and reuse the actual heading that we already created. But because we copied this from a previous section or previous frame, we should be good to go. Last thing, as always, I just want to fine tune the actual height just so that we can get absolute positioning. To do that, I'm going to click on my container and I'm going to detach instance. With that done, I'm going to select on the heading. We're just going to move it up a little bit. Subheading should be fine. All right, so now we have our heading added to our classes section. Now we're going to start adding the actual tabs. Now with tabs and with Bootstrap tabs, it's completely customizable and you can make it look like exactly what you want. But with that said, let's go ahead and take this container and duplicate it. Now, as always, we need to make sure that we change the actual layout from horizontal to vertical. With that done, I'm going to open up our second container and I'm going to clean out the row itself. With that done, I'm going to take my text tool and we're going to start adding the actual tab text items. So let's start by adding beginner. The reason why I'm selecting beginner is because when designing a website, you always need to make it attractive. And when it comes to yoga and fitness, it's always a good idea to try and attract people that's never used yoga before. And hence why I'm using the words beginners yoga. Now, with that done, let's start modifying. Let's start by detaching our actual font properties. And let's change this to bold. I'm also going to change the color and I'm going to select gray 800. Let's go to preview mode and click the right arrow and see, okay, we're getting there. Next thing I want to do is actually start moving around the spacing. So to do that, we're going to click on the frame. I'm going to make a spacing of 48. Go back to preview, have a quick look. Looks okay. With that done, opening up the row again, we're going to start duplicating this text. So I'm going to duplicate it 2 or 3 times. Once I've done that, I'm going to select all of it, group it again. I'm going to select auto layout and change the layout to horizontal. I'm also going to rename our actual newly created group. I'm going to call it tabs container. With that done, I want to add a bit of gapping. So I'm going to change the gap to perhaps 48. Note that I'm sticking with spacing of 48, 35, 25, 16, because that's all based on the spacing variables of Bootstrap itself. Now, yes, you can modify it and we will modify it when we start developing this website. But in most cases, I like sticking to default. It just makes things easier when it comes to development. Going back to preview mode, you're going to see that, okay, getting somewhere. Next up, I want to change some of the text. So let's change the second one. We're going to call it stretching. Now again, you can call it whatever you want. This is just for practice purposes. Let's call this fly yoga. I don't even think there is such a thing, but sure, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to duplicate it again, and let's say yin yoga. And let's duplicate it again. So I'm using Control D to do that, by the way. And let's do the last one, flow yoga. Perfect. So when we navigate back to our preview mode, you can see everything is nicely next to each other with a spacing of 48, and it's nicely centered in our actual frame. Again, auto layout makes things so much easier because before that existed, we had to literally use the ruler tool and different types of tricks and techniques to make sure everything is centered properly. All right, so now with this done, the next thing I want to do is create an active preview. So to do that, we're going to select beginners yoga and we're going to group this again. We're going to rename this to active and we're going to activate auto layout. With auto layout activated, we're going to get rid of the actual gap because we don't need it. We're going to make sure it's center aligned. I'm going to start adding some padding. So I'm going to start with 16 left, right, and 16 top, bottom. And let's go ahead and add a full just so that we can see what we're working with here. Obviously, this is not going to be the actual full. We just want to see how this looks like right now. So I personally think we should probably go for a stroke instead of a full. So I'm going to remove that full and add a stroke. I'm going to add our actual primary color for the stroke. And I'm going to add a border radius. So let's add 25. Oh, that's too much. I'm going to add 16. That looks pretty good. A few minor adjustments. First off, I want to increase the actual width of the border itself. See how that looks like. I'm going to go back to preview. I'm going to select the options. I'm just going to say full screen so that we can get a more realistic view of how it really is going to look like. Now with that done, one thing I want to do is I feel like the padding at the top and bottom is too much based on the padding on the left and right. So let's go ahead and just slightly adjust it. So padding top and bottom, let's change that to 12. Padding left and right, I'm going to change that to 18, perhaps 20. I'm going to revert back to 18. I feel like 18 is probably the best spot. And that looks pretty good. Decrease our actual border radius. I'm going to change that to 14. And again, design is all about playing around until you get a perfect match. Last but not least, I just want to change the actual color from gray to primary. All right, there we have a basic Bootstrap tab system. And this indicates to the user that, hey, there's more than just one option here. All right, so now with that done, I'm going to minimize my row. I'm going to take that, I'm going to duplicate it again. Open up the row, and we're going to clean everything out. Perfect. Now we're going to start by adding our image. So on the left-hand side, I'm going to select the rectangle tool. I'm just going to drag it onto the artboard. Again, notice how the height is adjusting based on what is inside of the actual frame itself. Now, with this, and again, all the media and images I'm using is available in the description of this YouTube video. So make sure to check it out. I've added it in a zip folder. You can download, extract it, and use it as you go through this course. Now, with the rectangle selected, we're going to add our image. So I'm going to click on the fill. I'm going to go and add the actual image. This normally takes a second or two, especially if the image is quite large. So we're just going to give it a sec. All right, so now with it loaded in, there's one or two things I want to show you. First off, with any image that you upload into a rectangle tool or circular tool or any kind of tool, you always have the option of changing the image. So when you click on fill, you get fill, fit, crop, and tile. In most cases, I always use fill or crop. And the reason I use crop is because it allows you to slightly modify the image. So you can hold in shift and you can increase and decrease the actual image. And you can also hold in shift and move it about. Now, holding in shift constrains the properties, which is in most cases exactly what you want. I'm going to move this image up a little bit so that her foot just touches base at the bottom. Then we should be good to go. The other thing I want to show you with images is you can also modify the exposure. So if you want to slightly increase or decrease the exposure, contrast, saturation, temperature, you name it, you can definitely do it there. It saves a lot of time. Back in the old days when this didn't exist, we always had to open it up in Photoshop and do it manually. All right, so now with our image added, one thing I want to do is just add a little bit of border radius. I'm going to go with 25 for now and see how that goes. Once that's done, I'm going to select the image. I'm just going to call it image left. I'm going to group it and activate auto layout. Rename the auto layout. I'm going to call it left. The other thing you can also do, little side note, is you can call it call MD6. The reason why we do that is because it helps the developers understand exactly what kind of column system you're going to go for. So call meaning column, MD meaning medium device, and 6 meaning the half of 12. When designing or developing in Bootstrap, all the columns equals to a total of 12. So 6 and 6 will equal to obviously 12. All right, so now with that done, I'm going to select the row and we're going to change the actual gap to auto. And when you do that, one thing I've noticed is our layout is set to vertical. I'm going to change that to horizontal. You're going to notice that the actual alignment is always at the top when you do that. So I'm going to set that to middle. Now, when you do this at this stage, you're not going to see anything, and that's fine. All right, so now with that done, I'm going to zoom out. We're going to reuse some of the elements that we've already used. In the previous section of this video, we essentially created a heading and paragraph, and this can definitely be reused. With that said, I'm going to minimize it. We're going to open up a different service bar that I've already detached the instance from earlier on in the video. I'm going to open up service bar. We're going to select changing room and that paragraph. We can copy it. Going back to what we're creating right now, we can go into the row that we've just created and we can literally just paste it. Once that's done, you'll notice that the image width actually changed. We'll get into that in a second. I'm going to make sure that the heading and subheading is selected. I'm going to group it again. I'm going to call it right/call MD6. Again, notifying the developers that we're using column 6. With that done, I'm going to activate auto layout. I'm going to change the layout to vertical. All right, one thing you're going to notice is by default, Figma will automatically try and predict what the actual gap spacing needs to be. Obviously, 285 is too much for us. So I'm going to change that to 25. Next, I want to select the paragraph. I'm going to left align it. I'm going to change the fix width to full container. All right, so we're starting to look like we are getting somewhere. Now, with that done, you will notice that the width of the image on the left-hand side has significantly decreased. So we need to change a few settings in Figma in the layout to make sure that we achieve the call 6 and call 6, which equals to 12. To do that, we're going to select the group left, call MD6. We're going to change the hug to full container. We're going to do the same for right. We're going to change fix to full container. So what did we do here? Well, we told Figma to mathematically make sure that both left and right has the same width based on the row's width. I know that sounds super confusing, but let me show you. Opening up the left group, I'm going to select image. we're going to change the fixed width to full content. And one thing you're going to notice is the image is going to stretch. And the reason for that is because back when we imported the image, we changed full to crop. So I'm going to change this back to full. We're not going to worry about the height just yet. We're just going to make sure that we change the height to full container. By doing that, the height of the image will adjust based on the content on the right-hand side. All right, closing that up. The next thing I want to do is beef up our paragraph. So I'm going to double click on the paragraph. We're going to open up our plugins and we are going to reuse the lorem ipsum that we used earlier on in the video. Now, if you only joined us now, you can easily get a plugin that generates lorem ipsum by clicking on the plugins and searching it right there in the search box. All right, so what it's telling us is we need to select a layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. With it selected, generating 5 might be too excessive for what we want to do. So I'm literally going to change it to 1 and hit generate. All right, so it generated a paragraph for us, but we need to modify it a little bit. So I'm going to change the fixed height to hug, and you're going to see it automatically adjust to the amount of content within the paragraph. All right, so now with the height being the same or hugged as the content within, I'm going to scroll in a little bit. I'm going to scratch off or remove some of this dummy text. Next, I just want to change this heading to beginners yoga. All right, now we have to fine tune it. We need to add a bit of padding and spacing so it actually matches what we're looking for. I'm going to zoom out, go back and click on the row. I'm going to minimize left and right. And with that done, we're actually going to change the auto back to having a gap. And I'm going to change the gap to 48. I'm going to zoom in, select my right, take beginners yoga and lorem ipsum, the heading and paragraph, group it again, and we're going to add auto layout. I'm just going to call it group. The reason I'm doing this is so that we can specifically modify the spacing between the heading and subheading. Now, one thing I've noticed is that the paragraph color is not ideal. So I'm going to select the paragraph, click on the fill properties. Let's change it to 800. It's a very minor change, but as you get better in designing, you'll definitely start noticing stuff like that. Okay, next up, I want to add another column system within our row right. So the easiest way to do this is to reuse what you already have. So I'm going to select the heading and paragraph over here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to right, minimize this group. I'm going to paste it again. With that done, I'm going to group it, activate auto layout. I'm going to rename it to call. I'm going to duplicate it, select both of them, group it again, rename it to row, and auto layout that, change it to horizontal, and we're going to change the gap to auto. With that all done, we are going to select the paragraph. We're going to decrease the actual amount of content. I'm going to do the same for this part. Notice that I have a little space here at the beginning. Just going to get rid of that. With that done, I'm going to select the row again. And one thing I notice is that we have no space between these two columns. And the reason for that is because we've selected auto. Now I can change it back over here by clicking and selecting 25. But another thing I want to show you is you can actually do it by selecting the row itself and hovering over here in the middle. You can drag it. So it's just another quick way of doing it. I personally like doing it over here, but 48 is what I want. Next, I want to change these headings and make them a little smaller. I've noticed that H4 is selected, so H4 in the Bootstrap properties, but let's keep it that. Perhaps let's change this one to H3. So to do that, I'm going to select it, and we're going to select H3. All right, so let's have a quick preview and see how that looks like. Obviously, still a lot to do, but it's starting to form shape. So now that we've changed these headings to H3s, we're going to modify it a little bit to make it more enticing for the user to navigate through our tab system and navigate through the website. First off, I'm going to double click on these headings and we're going to change it up. Again, we want to entice the user to navigate through the website. Complementary mats or 3 rugs is probably a good start. So let's start there. Just going to type in 3 rugs. And on the right hand side, we can probably change this to changing rooms. Now, again, if you are part of a design or a development team or a content team, this is obviously going to change. So this is just to give the user or give the project sponsor or give your manager just the idea of where we're going with the entire design. Now let's be a little bit creative. I'm going to go back to 3 rugs and let's add something. Let's add something cool. I'm going to click on the column. I'm going to take my text tool. I'm going to drop it in. I'm going to type the letter 1. I'm just going to click anywhere else. Now I'm going to detach it and we're going to change this to maybe light. Let's see how that goes. Also going to change the font to 64. Now this is a custom font. This is a custom situation. So we most likely, when we're going to design this, probably going to create a custom class for this, or just maybe modify some of the variables. Again, I want to change the color. So let's change this to primary. Now with that done, I'm going to hit Control G and we're going to group it together. Now I've noticed that it's not inside of our row. It actually went and created a separate row. I'm going to take this and drag it into it. Because we've modified the row, it's pushing that one up, but we're going to fix that in a second. I'm going to change this to number, rename it to number. We're going to activate auto layout. And next, we are going to add a little fill just so we can see what we're doing. So I'm just changing it to light. No, that's too light. I'm going to change it to perhaps just color for now. Obviously that looks terrible, but we're going to change that in a second. All right, so with that done, we're going to change our hug to fixed. And let's change it to 100 by 100. Okay, so now with that changed, I'm just going to center align it and I'm going to change the radius to something ridiculous like 500 because that's going to create a perfect circle. Now that we've done that, I'm going to detach the actual color, get rid of the color. I'm going to add a stroke and we're going to add a primary stroke. I'm also going to change the width. I'm going to change that to 3. Let's see how that looks like. All right, here we go. All right, so now that we created a number 1 icon for that matter, we're going to reuse this. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that because I'm also going to duplicate this row to create something awesome. Now, with that said, I'm going to take this number 1 icon that we just created and we're going to create a component of it. Why do we do that? Well, we're probably going to reuse this icon in the future in other pages or down below or somewhere else. So always have a mindset of creating components. It is super important. All right, so with this component created, I'm going to navigate over to assets and I'm going to drop it in on the right-hand side. Now, in most cases, it's not going to drop it where you want, but it looks like this time it did. So that's good. With that done, I'm going to detach the instance. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to change this number 1 to number 2. When we have a look at the quick preview, we can see that we have free rugs and changing room. The next step is to literally duplicate this entire row. So I'm going to take this row, we're going to duplicate it. Now, here's a little glitch from Figma. In my designing career, I've came across this many times. So seeing this is not really an issue. But when you see this and when you see it overlapping other content, it's most likely because the row that everything is within, it automatically changes the height from hug or full to fixed. So we just got to change it back to hug and you'll see that everything is proper the way it should be. So I'm going to go ahead and change this number 1. I'm going to change that to number 3 and I'm going to do the same for this one, change it to number 4. Now with that all done, the other thing I want to do is also change the image height because the image height is set to fix. And when we actually click on the image, you're going to notice it's not the image itself, but rather the group, the column that we created that's doing that. So I'm going to click on call left, call MD6. We can change the fixed to full content. The reason why we're changing full content is because it's literally going to adapt the height based on the item on the right hand side. And in Bootstrap, we use flex items and flex properties to get to this. But again, we'll get there when we physically develop this website. So check the description and check my YouTube channel because I'm going to drop a video where we take this whole design and move it into development itself. All right, so with this all done, I just want to increase the spacing between this paragraph and this icon, and the same with this one. So to do that, we're going to click on the right one. We're going to increase 25 to 48. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's have a look at the preview. Yeah, we're getting there. It looks pretty good. Now, you'll notice that I'm not going to change the headings. I'm going to leave it as is because later on, or if you're in a team, you'll notice that the content team will go and change it. So later on in this design, when we wrap everything up and we look at everything, we'll start changing headings. Okay, navigating back, I want to add a button. So we have 2 ways of doing this. We can either add the button over here, or we can add the button on the right-hand side or on the right column. I'm going to minimize everything and we're going to go to assets and we're going to drop in the button. So I'm just going to drop it in at the bottom for now. And I'm going to do the same for the column right. I'm going to drop it in there. And obviously every time when you drop assets in, and this is probably Figma that can maybe improve this, but it will always drop it where you don't want it. So I'm just going to move this into the row itself. No, that's not what I want. So I'm going to move it into this right group. It's going to put it right at the top. So we just got to move it down to the bottom. So now we have two options to choose from. So when we look at the preview, we can see that we have this option here and we have this option. So I personally like having the button here and not there just because of this huge amount of space. So I'm going to get rid of this. All right, so now when we look at it, looks pretty good. We have our tabs, we have our button at the bottom. Now I want to rename this button and maybe let's change it to get a free trial. Okay, so now it's renamed. I'm just gonna have a look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now what we've created in this section of the video, we created the tabs, we created the Bootstrap tabs. And with all that, we also created a few icons that we can reuse. And later on, we'll definitely come back and change headings and maybe add a little bit of content, maybe use ChatGPT to do that. But for now, this looks like a great Bootstrap tab section. With this all said, we created this section to really attract the user to actually engage with the website. So I'm going to zoom out and I'm just going to move this up a little bit. And the same with this, I'm going to move it up a little bit just so we can see an overall view of what we've created so far. Now we have our slide section, we have our services, and we have latest classes. The next part of the video, I want to physically create an area where we can show all the staff members. And after that, we are going to create a banner and then the footer. And we're going to play around with different variations. And at the end of the video, once we're done with everything, we're actually going to snap everything together and create multiple different types of designs by easily just changing a background here or a font color there. So that's why I'm doing it in these different sections. So make sure to stick around, make sure to watch the entire video because it's definitely going to show you the right way of doing this and the easy way, the quick way. All right, so next up, we're going to create another section where we're going to showcase all our different instructors. So stick around. All right, so in the next section, we're going to focus on creating a Our Team section. And this is part of our marketing strategy or our conversion strategy for that matter, is to really create a section where people can be attracted to whatever's on the page and also get them to move into our sub pages. Now, what we're going to do, and I'm just going to take this class section and we're just going to move it down a little bit. And the next step is I'm going to take the frame tool and drag it onto the artboard. I'm going to make sure that my width is 1920, and we're going to activate auto layout. I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to say maybe team members. I think that's a good name for it. We're going to make sure that the height is set to hug for now. That's fine, but we got to make sure that we change the hug to fixed. We always want to avoid not doing that. Okay, now that this is added, we need to add our container as per usual. So I'm going to go back and we're going to search for container. And I'm going to take the heading because we're probably going to reuse the heading as well. I'm going to go back to team members and we're just going to paste it in right there. And as per always, we need to change it so that it's centered. Make sure that the actual artboard is also, or the frame for that matter, is also centered. I'm going to add a little bit of padding at the top and bottom. And as per usual, I'm using 96 and I'm going to be consistent throughout the entire design. All right, now that we've done that, I'm going to change the heading to our great team. And as per in the previous part of the video, we're always going to get this. This is normal. Just want to make sure that we say hug content so that I make sure that it actually has the correct width. Now with that, I'm also just going to decrease the actual spacing at the top and bottom just so that we can get something that's more closely aligned. Okay, now that we've added our heading, and as you can see, as we go through this entire design, it's getting quicker and quicker. The next step here is we're going to take the container and we are going to duplicate the container again. And when we do that, and as per usual, this is pretty typical, we need to change the actual orientation to be vertical instead of horizontal. Okay, with that done, I'm just going to delete the content within the row, not the row itself, but the contents within. And now I'm going to zoom in and we're going to start dragging a rectangle tool. So I'm just going to drag a rectangle tool. And it's gonna make sure it's fixed for now. And we're gonna change that to 350 by 350. And when that's done, I'm just gonna name it IMG, and we're gonna group it again. And we are gonna auto layout this group, and I'm gonna call it call. You can see as we go through this entire design, once you get it, once you understand how Bootstrap works, once you've grasped what we're doing here, things definitely get easier. All right. One thing I want to do though is the space between this and the heading. So I want to go back to the actual frame, and we want to change this to 48. There we go. We've got good spacing. Next, I want to just add a bit of radius on this guy. And I'm going to hit my play button. My play button disappeared there. While it's loading there, definitely want to see what I'm doing while I'm doing it. While we wait for the loading, I'm just going to duplicate this guy. Duplicate it 3 times, go back to the row. We're going to change this to horizontal layout. I think having 3 is a good amount. I'm just going to go to preview, and I'm going to continue clicking on the right arrow till we get to where we want. I'm just going to go back here. Yeah, see, that looks really good, by the way. All right, so we have 3 boxes here, or 3 columns here, and I think that's a good one to have. Now I am going to make sure that it adapts to the entire width of our container. So to do that, as per usual, we're going to change this to full content. And we're going to do the same for the column itself. Make sure we full content. And I'm going to leave the height unfixed because we want to keep it at 350. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that for the others as well. We can also say full content on that one. That's fine. But the columns, I want to keep the height to be fixed. So full content. All right. Now it's evenly distributed. And when it's evenly distributed, I'm going to take this row and we're just going to add 48 so that we have that beautiful spacing. And it's consistent throughout the design. So we have that spacing here and over there. All right. Now there's another plugin I want to show you that to really speed things up. And essentially what we want to add here is headshots. And throughout this design and throughout this entire video, we've been adding images by uploading, selecting our box or our rectangle tool and clicking on the right hand side and adding an image that I've sourced and downloaded, and by the way, added in the description below. But the next plugin I'm going to show you is actually going to speed it up and make it even easier at this point. It's called Unsplash. So when you open up your plugins and you search image, or when you search Unsplash, you will get a plugin called Unsplash. Now, as per usual, plugins do take some while, and it does take a while to load up. So we're just going to give it a second here to load up. And while it loads up, I just want to add that I think I'm getting closer to the font that I want to select for this design. We've been using just the basic Bootstrap font, and in the next few videos, we are definitely going to get closer, and we're definitely going to use a great looking font. All right, so I have the plugin kind of loaded up here. What I want to do in the search box, I want to search for headshot. Because we're going to add some headshots, we can start by selecting our first rectangle or the column underneath the column, and we're going to start adding a few headshots. Now, I'm going to start with this guy right here. Let's add him in there, and that looks good, but we definitely want to adjust that. So I'm just going to drag this to the side, get rid of the actual full color. We're going to change the full. We're going to see if we can change that to crop. And the reason I'm doing that, just because I want to move him down a little bit. And I'm going to play around with his exposure a little bit. I'm just going to bring it down. I want to get some more contrasty colors in here. Just want to make sure that it looks, looks good. It looks to what I want. Bring up the temperature maybe a bit. And you know what? By the way, his background is kind of matching our slide background, which is good to see. And the highlights, we're just going to leave it as is. And the shadows, maybe up the shadow a bit. You got to play around with these settings until you get something that looks really good for you. Really looks good for whatever you or your design team is looking for. Now, I'm going to do the same with the next column. Now, see how easy this is. See how easy it is to just go and select whatever you want out of this plugin, and it adds it. So I definitely want a female next. So I think I'm going to choose her. I'm going to add it, see how it looks like. Most likely going to need to change. Just going to remove that fill, but we're most likely going to need to change it to crop and just move her down a little bit. We are definitely going to add her. She good colors in the background there for sure. Definitely looks very much yoga-y. Just going to change this to crop, and we can move her down a little bit. There we go. That looks good. I'm actually going to change her out. I've changed my mind on this one. Let's see if we can get something that looks very yoga-y. There we go. That definitely looks yoga for sure. Because we changed the crop, you're going to see that your image will stretch. So we want to change it back to full, move down to crop again. We want to move that down. All right, so that's how easy it is to add images when using that plugin. So we're getting closer. We're getting to a point where we have a great team. I want to take this row and we're just going to duplicate it. Now what I want to add is just a little paragraph at the top before we go any further. I'm going to reuse what I already have. So we have a paragraph copy right here. I'm just going to copy that. We are going to go to this row. We can essentially reuse this row, the same as what we would do in Bootstrap. And I'm just going to paste it in there, center align it. And with that center aligned, we are going to get rid of our search for image, open up Lorem Ipsum again. All right, so with this open, I'm going to select it and let's change this to one paragraph again and let's get it generated. I never like to use Lorem Ipsum right at the beginning. That's just a personal preference. Now with that done, I'm going to click on the row. Just going to add this, increase it to maybe 35. Go back and see. I see the actual paragraph copy is a little bit too much for me. So I'm going to decrease it for sure. So let's change it to about that amount. Let's see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. We just got to make sure the colors are consistent. Yeah, colors look good. There we go. This needs to be at 800. I'm just going to add that to 800. Let's see how that looks like. All right, getting close. Let's go ahead and change these last few images. So I'm going to go to Unsplash. I'm going to open up Unsplash. We're just going to add the last 3 images. So normally it takes a second for this plugin to load up. All right, so with it loaded up, I'm just going to search headshot again. Perfect. And we're just going to scroll through this again. I'm just going to select the actual rectangle that I want to change. And we need to search for a good looking, yoga looking headshot. So at this point, I'm not really seeing anything that's going to work for what I'm looking for. And I'm going to change my search a little bit. So let's see what happens if we search yoga. Definitely not a headshot kind of look and feel here. I think that one might work. Let's see. Just add it in. And of course, it's going to be all stretched. So we got to change it to full, bring it back to crop and move it down a little bit. Actually, we got to be careful here and make sure that it fits pretty good so that the cutoff looks good. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm just going to look at preview. Yeah, we might change it later on, but for now, that's good enough. All right, so I'm just scrolling through some of these images, see if we can get something that looks good. I'm going to change the yoga to fitness. Maybe we can see something that works over here. Maybe we're going to get a good looking image that we can use. Actually, let's see if this one works. So again, I'm going to change the crop to fill and then back to crop again. Perhaps move this up. It doesn't look bad. I mean, it doesn't look 100%, but normally when you initially design a website, you just want to get the ideas out there. I mean, fine-tuning images and all that kind of stuff. You normally do that right at the end. And even if you've already seen or shown your design to your project sponsors or to your clients for that matter. So at this stage of the design, it's usually just to get placeholders in. But because we're creating a video, I am just taking the extra mile and trying to get the best image. But selecting media and selecting images normally takes a considerable amount of time. I just selected the wrong image here, but let's choose her for now, and she will be our image for this right now. So I'm going to change it to crop. I'm just going to move it down. All right, let's see how this looks like. Okay, as I said, not 100%, but we're definitely going to fine tune it as we go through this. All right, so now we created an Our Team section. I'm going to add a button. We're going to say, learn more about us. I'm going to click on this section. I'm going to go to assets. I'm going to take the button and we're going to drag it in. And as per usual, as I've said throughout this entire video, it never, ever puts it where you want it to be. I'm just going to drag it into the container. I'm just going to change the wording button to learn more about us. You know what? Let's change this button up a bit. Let's make it an outline. We've been using the same button over and over, so let's use outline here just to change it up a little bit. So we're going to change the fill to outline, and it should adapt to our previous settings. I see that it did not, which is fine. We can quickly change that. I'm going to change this to 3. Oh, that's too much. Let's change that to 2. And let's change this color to our primary color. Have a look at it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. So When I use the arrows to kind of navigate between what we have, it's starting to look like something, it's starting to look like a good design. I know I'm saying that a lot, but trust me, it's getting there. Okay, so now with this done, our team section is done. The next thing I want to do, the next thing we're going to focus on is creating a call to action box. After that, we are going to create the footer. But with the call to action box, we are going to play around with a background image. We're going to add a gradient and just see where we go. So that's next up. All right, so what we're going to focus on now is creating that call to action section. So first off, I'm going to hit the frame. I'm going to drag it onto the artboard, and we're going to make sure that our width is 1920, and we're going to activate auto layout. We're going to make sure that we select fix. So we do that every single time. Every single time we create a frame, we do that. All right, I'm going to change the naming convention to CTA, or you can say call to action. Again, this is completely up to you, completely up to how you name your frames, your groups, your everything. All right, so if you came across this video and you are watching this, make sure to check out the full video. I have an in-depth free video with all the assets added into the description. We have everything in there that you can use. And essentially this entire video, it's a large one, it's showing you everything from beginning to end. So make sure to check that out. And if you've been watching this since the beginning, I want to say thank you for that. Make sure to hit a like and subscribe button. Make sure that you check in because we do post videos on a weekly basis. All right. Now with the CTA already done, we are going to go back and reuse some of our containers. Now you can technically go and recreate the container every single time, but I'm a big fan of saving time. So we're going to copy that. And in this CTA, we're going to drop that in. As always, it's going to be centered. It's going to be on the left side. So we want to make sure that we click on the actual frame and we center this. While I'm here, I'm also going to add the actual spacing that I want, which in our case is 96. And we are going to get rid of everything. I'm going to show you why. So I'm going to take this heading, I'm going to axe it, take that, get rid of that. All right, so now we only have our row. But I'm going to go back to the frame and we're going to add a great looking background image. So I'm going to open up that Unsplash plugin that we've been using in the previous part of this video, in the previous video. We're going to take this and we're going to add a good looking background image. All right, with this loaded up, I'm going to hit the search box and I'm going to search for yoga. Take it a second to load up. And as we went through this earlier on, there was a few images that I really, really liked. And I want to make sure that we can get to it again. We want to make sure when you add a background image for a container or for an entire frame, you want to avoid picking an image like this, which is in portrait shot. You want to select an image that has a beautiful landscape view. All right, so this one looks pretty good. And the reason I'm choosing this specific image is because of her colors and just because of the colors we've been using the whole time. Now you've noticed that it literally dropped it just right here. And the reason for that is, I'm just going to delete it. The reason for that is because we didn't select our frame. So when we select the frame and we redo that, you will see that we'll add it into the actual frame as a background image. And that's exactly what we want. I want to take a second here and she is added in, which is beautiful. Okay. We go to preview mode and hit the right arrow. We can see we're getting there. We're getting there. What I want to do is I want to add, obviously, like I said, a call to action. So with that said, right now, as you can see, there isn't much going on and most of her is being cut off. So we need to change that. So in the row, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the text tool and we're going to drop it in. Okay, so let's say free 30-day membership. Very basic. And you can see that it's body-based text and full of white for some reason. So we're going to change that. I'm going to change this to heading. Let's change it to heading 1 for now. And obviously I want to change this. I'm going to go for gray 800 again. When that's done, we want to add a paragraph text. So I'm going to reuse what we already have. So I'm going to copy that text and we're going to scroll back down and we're going to paste that in. With that all done, we are going to click on both of the layers on the left hand side and we're going to select the text left align. We're going to make sure that it does it properly. Okay, so for some reason it's not doing that, and the reason for that is because of our width. We're going to make sure that we say full container And the same thing for this. I'm just going to say, oh, it is already full container, which is good. Okay, perfect. What I want to do now is I want to select both of them. We're going to group it together and we're going to add auto layout. Now I'm going to add a fill. When the fill is added, I want to add a bit of padding on both sides. I'm going to go for 48 on both sides for now and see how that looks like. We want to add a radius as well. And here I want to over exaggerate the radius a little bit. We're going to see how that looks like. Yeah, that's getting there. It's getting closer. It's getting to a point what I'm looking for. With that now all done, I'm just going to say background. So I'm just going to say BG for that one. I want to change the spacing to 48. So this is a basic background that we've just created, but it's stretching across the whole thing. That's not what I'm looking for. I actually want it to be on this side. And to do that, we are going to get rid, or we're going to change the container to container fluid. So this is actually the first time in this design that we're going to do that. And so I'm going to go back and we're going to go to container and we are going to adjust it. So container is set to fix and it is set to a width of 1320, so 1320. We're going to change that and we're going to change it to full content, and it's going to fill out the entire frame, which is fine. We just want to make sure that we select our frame and we want to change the gutter space or the padding left and right. We want to change that to 25 because that's a default for Bootstrap for that matter. All right, so now we have container, but I'm going to change this to container fluid just so that we make sure that it's consistent. And now we are going to regroup this BG and I'm going to call it call MD6. Once that is done, we now are going to actually get it to be on the right hand side. So I'm going to add auto layout for this guy and we're going to duplicate that, go back to row, and we're going to change the actual orientation and go back to the first column that we have and get rid of that. Now we essentially created a 2-column or a col 6, and now we just got to fine tune what we have here. So I'm going to open up our BG and we want to make sure so it's set to white. One thing I've noticed though is that our border radius for some reason has disappeared, so it might be a glitch that we're sitting here with. We got to figure out why that is happening, where that actual radius is coming from, which is very odd, I have to say. So let's change this to 10 and just see what happens. Extremely odd that that is definitely taking place, and I think I know what's going on. Okay, so what's going on is that the container fluid has a border radius of 50 and we have clip content. So if we deactivate that, you're going to notice, see, it's going to go back to usual. We want to make sure that this is 0, but we want to keep the clip content for now. Let's see how that goes. Actually, no, let's turn it off because we're going to add a shadow to this box. So going back to our BG, I'm going to add a border radius of 50. Let's have a quick look, see how that looks like. It looks there, it's getting there. One thing I want to do is I want to select both of these, group it again. We're going to add auto layout. I'm just going to call it group. We are going to change the spacing to 25. I want to add a button structure. Now, I can go and add button structure, rename and all that, but we've already done that. So we might as well reuse what we have. So I'm going to go back to the very first section. We're going to select this row. We're going to copy it. I'm just going to zoom out and go back to that area right there. With that now added, we're just going to drop it into our BG. There we go. We are getting there. But obviously I don't want it centered. I want to make sure that it is left aligned. To do that, we're going to change the alignment and turn it to left. Okay. So again, you can change the actual text of the button itself if you really want to. I'm going to leave it as is for now. I'm going to decrease this actual radius. I feel like 50 now is too much. And as you've noticed going through this design process, design is all about changing things constantly, right? You always want to change things. So one thing I want to do, I'm going to take this heading. We have selected H1. I'm actually going to move to display and move around and play with display here. Let's see how that looks like. All right, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. Okay, now we have our call to action. Now we got to make it look really good. So to do that, I'm going to go back to our CTA, to our frame, get rid of this full. We don't need that. I'm going to hit crop here and I'm going to see if I can get this to look a little better. I'm going to maybe move her down to about here, see if that works. All right, now I'm just going to play around with the color a little bit. So I'm going to up the exposure or down the exposure for that matter. Really bring in some contrasting colors here and also play around with the actual warm colors that we have here. So really want to not too much. Maybe that looks really good. Again, this is all about playing around until you get it to a point where it looks really, really good. Okay, now when we look at the preview, it looks much better. Okay, now I'm going to add a shadow to this box. So I'm going to click on the box, make sure we click on BG because I see we've selected the wrong group, and we want to make sure we click BG, open up our plugins, and we're going to click on Shadow Maker. All right, so once that's loaded up, I'm going to change it to about that orientation, bring up the opacity, add a bit more distance to it, up the opacity. Got to look at preview and see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. We're very close. Let's see what happens if we add a little bit more distance to it and a little bit more, or decrease or decrease the opacity for that matter. That's too much. Maybe about there. Let's just see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now, the last thing I want to do is I do not like the spacing between the actual paragraph and the button itself. I feel like that's too much. We're just going to click on BG and we're going to change that to 35. Have a look at it. One thing I want to do is I want to create a variation of this. So I'm going to take this whole entire CTA and we're going to duplicate the whole thing. And I'm going to go to the actual background and we're going to add something. Now, this is why I create or design a website this way. Because if you design everything on one frame, you won't be able to easily move things or duplicate things and create different variations. So now here's a good example of me creating different sets of variations. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to select our frame and I'm going to add an overlay to this background. I'm going to create an actual gradient overlay. So where it's black, we're going to select a mostly used color and we're going to up this opacity over here. And I'm going to move this to here and we have to essentially play around with this until we get something that looks good. Now, when you add all this, nothing's going to happen because it is set to 20% opacity over here. That always happens. That's kind of default with Figma. When you add something, it always does that. Now with that decreased, we can start playing around and see if we can get any kind of variation of this that's going to look good. So first off the bat, I'm going to swap these guys around. And that is definitely always happen to always duplicate if you move too quickly. And we're going to see how it looks like when we decrease. I'm going to change the color just a little bit, see if that works. When I look at preview and I go to this one, now we've created a different variation that you can showcase your client. Very, very important. And I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to create another variation. So we're going to duplicate this and you can, create as many variations if you want. That's all up to you as a designer, but I'm going to get rid of this and we are going to bring down the saturation big time so we can give a black and white look and feel. I'm going to add a full to this so that we can almost create a duotone look to this. So go back to 100 with this guy again. And we're going to select our primary color and bring down the opacity and see if we can create something that's going to look good. All right, that is way too light. So I'm going to bring it down maybe to something like that. See how that looks like. Up it a little bit, just maybe about there. There we go. That's another option. So let's go and create another option. You see how many options you can create? This makes it so flexible. This makes the whole idea of designing something for a client so easy because now you can just literally duplicate that. And at the end of this, obviously, we're going to put everything together. But now I'm going to get rid of this, get rid of the image, and we are essentially going to add a white color. I'm going to select the BG, get rid of all the shadows that our shadow maker created. And we are going to click on BG or make sure we clicked on BG, change the background color to that. Now the next thing, before I get rid of this column 6, I just want to see what's the width that we're playing with here. So it's 917.5, 917.5. I'm going to change this to fixed, make sure it's 917.5, and I'm going to delete the other column. Now it's going to move everything to the center. Now with that done, we are going to change this color of both the heading and paragraph. We're going to change that to gray 100, and the background of the button itself, we can change that to perhaps 900, and this we are going to change to 100, and we're going to change this one to 100 as well. There we go. Now we've created multiple variations for our clients to choose from. This one is pretty flat. I think we need to add a little bit of a shadow to this. So I'm going to select BG here, go back to shadow, and we're just going to add a very, very slight shadow, perhaps in a different direction, just to give it a more of a three-dimensionality to it. We've created multiple variations for our clients to choose from. So in the next part of this video, we're going to create a footer section, and after that, we are going to play around with fonts, and we're also going to play around with adding different variations. Okay, so now we're going to create the footer. We're going to create a beautiful footer for our entire design. By the way, if you only come across this video now and you want to see the full video, the entire video of us designing all this from scratch and using Bootstrap to do this all, make sure to check the full video. Make sure to check in the description below. And if you've been sticking around watching the full video, make sure to get your resources in the description below. By the way, just adding last thing before we get going here, we are going to develop all this. We are going to take this once we're done here, and I'm going to create a full video of creating and developing this using Bootstrap, using Docker, using Visual Studio Code, and creating something awesome. All right, so we're going to take the frame, we're going to drag it onto the artboard. We're going to make sure, as per always, that our width is 1920. We're going to add auto layout, and I think you're going to get used to this now. We've been doing it for quite a few times now. You get to the point now, you can see how easy it is once you've done it a few times, and it gets to be muscle memory. All right, so that's footer, what we've done right there. In this design, I am going to go for a very simplistic footer, something that is easy and simple. So we're going to go up, we're going to go to our logo, and before I duplicate this, before I do anything with this logo, I want to go back with our preview, and I just want to fine tune the logo because we're not 100% there yet. So first off, we're using black here. Don't like black. Let's go for gray 800, and let's see how that looks like. Definitely want to increase the font size on this. So let's change it to 24 perhaps. See how that looks like. Yeah, that already looks good. I'm going to take this icon, and which is our logo, by the way, and we're going to constrain the properties, which we can do right there. Let's increase the actual font size a little bit on it. And when I say font size, sorry, when I say font size, I'm so used to using font awesome with icons. That's why I said font size. But obviously, I mean the width and height of it. Okay, so last thing I want to do is take this logo and let's group it together. If it's not grouped together, yeah, it's already grouped together. And we're just going to add going to take the gap and make it 0 and add a bit of padding at the top, bottom, and left, right of it. Oh, okay. We don't want to change the gap because we do have two elements. For a second there, I thought we didn't have. All right, so with that done, I'm going to add a stroke. We're going to add primary, and we are going to add a little bit of a radius on this and see how that looks like. Give it a second. Sometimes it does take a second for our preview to load. There we go. Okay, that's obviously way too big. That's not what I was intended to happen here. So we're going to change this to 12, and let's modify this a little bit. Let's change our padding padding left and right, and top and bottom. Let's change that and see how this looks like. All right, so first off, it looks like a button. I don't really like that. So let's get rid of the stroke. The stroke was a idea that I had, and it's definitely not working. Okay, let's take this great fitness and let's change it to bold and see how that looks like. The icon is too big, so let's decrease the icon a little bit. Let's just see how that would look like. A little bit more. And I've noticed that we have padding on the left here, which now is offsetting the entire logo. So I'm going to go back to primary, and I'm going to click on this. Because we are not using an actual stroke anymore, we're just going to change both the left and right and top and bottom to 0. See how that looks like. Okay, last but not least, I just want to decrease the actual color of it and fitness. I'm going to take this fitness and we're just going to change it to the primary color. See how that looks like. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to take this, take it a step further. I'm going to duplicate it, group that again, add auto layout, make sure vertical is bottom. And we're going to take this and we're going to say yoga studio. Beautiful. And I'm going to change this to 16, actually make it 14px. I'm going to change the bold to light. And we're going to go back to our frame here. We're going to right align it and we're going to get rid of this gap. We're going to see how that looks like. There we go. Light is a little bit too light. So let's change it to regular. Just going to add in the actual frame. I'm just going to add a bit of gap here. And with that all done, go back to the logo. We're going to increase the logo just a slight bit and see how that looks like. All right, that looks pretty good. I just want to see how it looks like if we take this text and we make it a line on the left side. There you go. That looks good. Spot on, spot on, spot on. So I'm going to take this whole thing that we just created, primary logo. We're going to say create component. Now that we've done that, we can hit save. And by the way, while we're here, I really like that color. I like that background color. So when we start playing around with variables and different font sizes and all that kind of good stuff here at the end, we're definitely going to accommodate that color. All right, so on the footer, first thing I'm going to do is we need to add our container as per usual. So obviously with the CTA, we used a container fluid, which of course is not going to work in this situation. So we're going to reuse the container coming from the team members. And we can take it here, we can copy it and go down to the footer, we can paste it in. Of course, as always, it's going to be on the left-hand side, which is fine. We've learned now that we always got to make sure that it is centered and make sure that it is in the center of the actual frame itself. Now, with that done, we just want to add our usual padding, top and padding bottom. And by the way, I'm going to use 48 this time and not 96. So the spacing number 5 of Bootstrap. I normally do that because footers just looks better if the spacing is not that big. And I'll show you why. We're going to create a different variation for sure. I'm going to click on the container, open up row, and we're going to get rid of the heading. And we're going to get rid of the paragraph copy. Going to go to assets. And we are going to look for the logo that we just created, which I don't see here, but I'm pretty sure if I search here at the top, I'm going to see it right there, which is perfect. So I'm going to drop that in. And we want to make sure to click on our actual frame because we want to preview that. So I'm going to use the right arrow till we get to that point. All right, that looks pretty good. Now what I want to do is go back to our main navigation. We're literally going to take this and we're going to reuse it. Saves us a lot of time if we don't need to redesign everything from scratch. So I'm going to take inner nav and we're going to say create component of it. We're going to go back, and if you use spacebar, hold in spacebar and you drag with your mouse, it's much easier than using the cursor or the mouse wheel for that matter. Mouse wheel sometimes takes a lot to get to the point, especially if your design starts getting big. All right, so with row selected, we're going to go to assets and we're going to search for nav. And right here, you can see is inner nav. So I'm going to take that. We're going to drop that in. And with that dragged in, we are going to go back to row. We're going to change our orientation to horizontal. I want to make this part auto. So it moves our logo to the left and our navigation to the right hand side. Now, because this is a footer, we're most likely not going to have this button, this call to action button, because if we have it, it's also going to show duplication, which can annoy certain people. So I'm just going to go ahead, not do that, not delete the whole thing. One thing we have to do here is we need to detach instance. And the reason for that is because we are modifying the actual inner contents. So I'm just going to delete that button. And we now have a basic looking footer. So when we look at the quick preview, when we look at that, that looks pretty good. So we're getting there. Next, I want to take the actual line tool. And we're going to drag a line at the bottom or just drag it anywhere. And again, you're going to see it's going to put it exactly where you don't want it. That's pretty normal. We're going to take the container and we're going to duplicate it, go back to the footer, and we're going to change our orientation to vertical. And the line that we have, we're just going to rename that and call it separator. The second created container I am going to delete everything that's within. And we are also going to change this auto and just make it 0. All right, now that we've done that, we can take the separator, we're going to drop it into that row. And now with that added, it looks like we are getting to a point where it's going to look like a separator. So let's finish the job. With the separator, I want to change the fixed width to full content, and we are going to select perhaps gray 300. That might be too light. Let's see. Yeah, that's too light. Let's select gray 400. Perfect. That looks good. Now I am going to go back to the footer and we're just going to add the gap. Let's make it 25. See how that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right. Because this is a footer navigation, I don't want arrows. That's the other thing we got to get rid of. You don't normally have arrows in a footer navigation. So let's see how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. I just want to increase the spacing, maybe 35. See how that looks like. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so we want to make sure this thing is centered. So I'm just going to click on the actual row. Yeah, we are centered, which is perfect. Okay, so now we've created our footer, a very basic footer. At the bottom here, we just want to add the usual, maybe social media icons on the right hand side and maybe copyright on the left hand side. So let's go ahead and we are going to take the container that we have. We're going to duplicate it and we're just going to clean out and get rid of the separator. We don't need that anymore. We're going to take a row. We're going to change that to auto. I'm going to take my text tool and drop it. And as always, it's not going to drop where you want it. That's fine. I'm going to say copyright and let's just, give it a date. 2023, 2024, doesn't really matter. And with that, we're just going to say all rights reserved. It's normally a very standard thing that you add to a website. One thing I want to do is I want to make sure that we select base text. And I'm going to detach it because I don't want regular. Let's go for medium, see how medium looks like. And let's go for 800 year. And with that all done, I'm going to take this and drop it into the row. All right, so let's have a quick preview. Go back, let's add a few icons that's going to be on the right hand side. So I'm going to open up, I'm going to select the row before we open that up, but I'm going to select the row, open up Iconify. All right, so let's start with our infamous Facebook. I'm going to take that, drop it in. Let's go for Twitter. Doesn't exist anymore. Let's see if they have X here. Oh, they do. Wow, that's awesome. All right, we're going to import. Oh, it overrode it. No, it didn't. Okay, cool. The next one is Instagram. And of course, my favorite, YouTube. Definitely want YouTube. And now you can add TikTok if you want. I am not a fan of TikTok. I do not condole using TikTok or any of that, in my personal opinion. But I'm going to take all this, take all these frames, and we're just going to change it to groups. The good thing is that the actual size of these vectors are good enough. I mean, it's a good size, so we don't need to modify that. What we want to do is take all of these and we want to group it again, activate auto layout. We want to change auto. I'm going to give you a ridiculous number. That's fine. We're going to change that to 12. For some reason, Facebook over there, good old Facebook, is not doing what we are telling it to do. Okay, so this, another example of a little glitch of Figma. When you sometimes add a few items into a group and you add auto layout, you'll notice that some of them will change to position absolute. So when you see these little squares around the actual group, it means that position absolute on the right hand side has been activated. So we're just going to deactivate that. Once you do that, you're going to see all our icons are on the left hand side. One thing though is just I want to increase the actual spacing between them. Last but not least, I'm going to change the actual color, change that perhaps to primary, see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. So now we've created a footer variation. One thing I want to do is take this home, the active, just change that to bold, see how that looks like. Awesome. We have a good looking footer. One thing I want to do is just fine tune it a little bit. So let's move this to here. Actually, I'm going to move it right to the end. Okay, we have a good looking footer and the footer is done. All right, so in the next part of the video, now that we have our footer done, we're going to put everything together. We're going to blend everything together. But before we do that, we're going to add a couple of variations for us. This is going to help you. We already created variations for our call to action, which is good. Now we're going to add a few variations here and there. We're going to add our font. We're going to put everything together and then we get to go. right, so this is the last part of the video. And just to recap, we are going to put everything together, but we're also going to play around with a little bit of variations. All right, so first things first, we are going to take our tablet and mobile. We're going to move that to the right-hand side. We're going to start putting the whole thing into one beautiful looking design. All right, so now that we've moved that, I am on the left-hand side here. I'm going to take the frame. We're going to drop in a clean frame. So I'm going to use 1920. We're going to activate auto layout. I'm going to make sure the gap is 0, make sure the padding is 0 on both sides and top and bottom. All right, so we're going to change the actual name to prototype design 1. And this is what the client's going to see, or your project sponsor, or whomever you're designing this for. Now we are going to select it. We're going to make sure that this is set to fixed and make sure this is set to hug. Now we're going to slap everything in. So to do that, we're going to start with slider. Going to take slider, copy that, and drop it into our prototype. Done. Okay, good. Next, we're going to take our services. We're going to copy that, and we're going to drop it into our design. Okay, so quick thing, what's happening here? As per always, as per usual, we need to adjust mainframe, our prototype design 1. So I'm going to select that. We're going to change that orientation. Good, there we go. Next up, we are going to take our latest classes. We're going to copy that. We're going to select our prototype design 1 and drop it in. All right, next, we're going to take our team. We're going to copy that, and we are going to select our prototype design 1, drop it in. See where I'm going out with this whole thing. Take the CTA, we're going to copy that, and we're going to drop it in. And last but not least, we're going to take our footer, copy it, and we are going to drop it in. So I'm just navigating or moving to the top here. All right, so now when we look at the preview, go back to everything, we are supposed to see a full design. Now I want this thing to be stretched or fit with. Yeah, that's it. And now we can scroll down and look at the entire design from beginning to end. Now, one thing I notice is that we have a lot of dead space here. And the reason for that is because of the padding that we use. So we're definitely going to modify that. Okay, so now with this all done, let's scroll to the top. Let's start by changing a few things here and there. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is we are going to keep this as is. So this is going to be a design variation for the client to choose from. Perfect, just as is, that's good. Now I'm going to take our services and we're going to duplicate it. And what I want to do when I duplicated this, I want to change the background color on this one. So I'm going to select our services. Let's go and change the background color. I'm going to change it to light, and we're going to change these boxes. We're going to change that to white. There we go. There's white. Beautiful. So that's another option for us to present to the client itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my first design prototype. I'm going to duplicate this whole thing. And you're going to notice that Figma already renames it for you, which is pretty cool. That's really good. It's a new feature, by the way. It was never like that, but I've noticed that on FigJam actually the other day. Okay, we're going to take our services. We're going to copy it, go back to prototype design 2, and we are going to open it up. And just wherever it says our services, I'm just going to delete that one. And then we're going to drop in our new one. Now it's going to drop it at the bottom, which obviously is not what we want. So I'm just going to scroll up. We're going to minimize all of the frames. I'm going to take it and we're just going to move it up. Now, what we've done is we created this beautiful looking background image to give that good, nice looking separation. Okay, so I want to be a little bit creative here. I want to add a wave between our services and latest classes. I think that's going to be a creative way of just getting some vibrance into this design. So to do this, I'm going to click on Prototype Design 2. We're going to open up plugins and navigate to plugins for that matter. And I'm going to select Get Wave. So if you don't see that, obviously you can search it, but you can search for Get Wave. Okay, I'm going to click on that. And essentially what this plugin does is it generates good looking, awesome looking waves that you can use throughout the entire design. Some people use this for charts, and I've used it for charts in the past as well. Works really great, but it can also be used for what we're trying to achieve here. All right, so when you see the plugin kind of pop up, you're going to see a little slide on the middle to right hand side of the plugin. And when you scroll it or when you drag it to the right, it's going to create more wave variants or add more kind of wavy parts to the wave. So you can go quite crazy here and be super creative. But for this and what I'm trying to achieve, I am going to stick with something like this. Now you can also click on this button here and it's going to give you different variations, but I really like this one and I'm going to drop this in. So I'm going to type or press create and it's going to drop it in for us. Now, a few things when you drop it in, it's not actually going to drop it into our frame. So we need to take it and we need to move it into our frame. Now that we've done that, we are going to change the color and I'm going to change the color to light. And I'm also going to flip it on the vertical axis. So there we go. Now we have a wave. So when we, oh, I can see that my preview is gone. So we're going to click on that. We're going to get that to open up again. But you're going to see that we have a creative way of shifting between these two sections. Now that we've done this, we can, I'm just going to scroll down. We can have a look at it. And I think we're at the wrong prototype. So I'm just going to click the right arrow. And there we go. We have our wave. But the problem is now is we have a lot of space at the top here, a lot of space here at the bottom. So we definitely need to go and modify this. Now, because we are using auto layout and because we are using the structure we're using, this can be quite tedious and this can be quite troubling. But, using this for many times, I've figured out a way to make it super easy. Now, first off, we're going to select this and we're going to decrease the actual height of it so that it still looks good. And you got to constantly switch between your prototype and your design to see how this looks like. But I think that's a good start. Next, what I want to do is I want to double click it and we need to highlight all these at the top. And we're going to use our arrows to move it down. And as you can see, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here and you're going to see that it gets to a point where it is getting smaller on the vertical axis. Okay, with that, I'm just going to select it. I'm just going to see, we have a little line there, so we've done too much of it. So I'm going to use the up arrow just to move it up a tiny bit. And let's see, let's put it about there. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Now we have a creative separation. And obviously you don't have to do this. This is just an extra little step. But now we have that creative kind of wave. Now you can go, if you're very particular like me when it comes to actual spacing, because obviously, there's a lot of space going on here, you can play around with the marginal padding top of latest classes. So I'm going to click on latest classes and we are going to open up the top and I'm just going to decrease the 96 to perhaps 48 and see how that looks like. Yeah, that already looks good. I'm going to do the same for our services as well. We just want to decrease the padding bottom. I'm going to change that to 48. And again, why I'm using 48, why am I using 96? Well, this is all part of Bootstrap. This is part of Bootstrap spacing sequence. And this is just going to make it so much easier to actually go and develop this. Now, I'm still not 100% there. I still feel like this is a lot of spacing. So I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to change the padding top. I'm going to change that to 0. See how that looks like. That looks pretty good. So now we've created a creative variant for our client to select, which looks pretty good. All right, so let's continue. Let's move on with this. I'm going to change the background color of our gray team as well. So I'm going to take this frame and we are going to duplicate it. And once we've duplicated this, I'm just going to zoom in, just going to move it down or move it closer. And with this, I am going to change the background. We're going to change it from white. Let's see how dark looks like. And again, this is all about playing around with different colors to see if it's actually going to work. I'm going to change all these. We're going to change it to white. Oh, I did not do the paragraph. So I'm going to select the paragraph and we're going to change that to white as well. Actually, that's too white. So let's go back. We're going to take the paragraph and we're going to change it to perhaps gray 200 or gray 400, just so that it gets to a point where it looks smooth. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to also change this one to gray 500. And I am going to change the color of team to primary, just so it gives a little separation there. All right, so now we have another variation that we can provide to our clients. I'm going to copy team members and we're going to drop it in here. So I'm going up, I'm scrolling up using my mouse wheel. Don't know why I'm doing that. I should use space, it's much quicker. And we're going to paste that in. All right, so now that we've pasted that in, we need to get it to this team member. So I'm going to delete this one and we're going to take this and we're going to move it up. All right, so now we've created yet another version for our client to choose from. And again, you can be super creative. Obviously, that button is not going to work. So I'm going to zoom in and we're going to change up that button. Now, you can go and change it at your different variation over here. But because I don't want this video to end up being 5 hours, we are just going to change it right here. So I'm going to change that and we're going to change it to primary color. And we're just going to change the font to white. All right, let me just scroll down here, select white. Perfect. So now when we go back to our preview, we can see that we are creating different variations for our clients to choose from. Last but not least, I'm going to use some of that call to actions that we already created. I'm going to take this one. We're going to reuse this one. I'm going to copy it and we're going to drop it in to our prototype design. And of course, it's going to drop it in at the bottom, which is kind of expected. I'm going to minimize my layers and we're going to move this up and I'm going to close or cancel or delete our call to action. And let's see how this looks like. Another variation for a client to choose from. So the point that I'm trying to make here is you can definitely play around and get very creative with your designs by doing it and designing it the way that we designed it. So I'm going to leave this with you. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and create more variations, play around, be creative. Make sure that you keep all your variations and variables on the right-hand side with different frames so that you can always revert back. Okay, now before we go on to the next part where we're going to select a good font, I am going to be changing this navigation. I'm going to actually get it to be in the center. So to do that, we're going to select it. We're going to select our container. And this is our inner nav right now. Because it's a asset or an instance, we are going to detach it because we want to modify it, of course. So once it's detached, we are going to select our home and everything in between from home to contact. We're going to select that. We're going to group everything that's within. We're going to activate auto layout. And I'm just going to say nav for now. And we want to take this nav and we are going to put it between the logo and the inner nav, which now it's not going to be inner nav anymore. It's going to be button. So we can change this to CTA button. Last but not least, I'm just going to increase the spacing here a little bit. And this, yet again, is another variation for you to showcase to the client. So the first variation being like this, and the second variation being like that. So the point that I'm trying to make is always be constantly making small changes because your project sponsor, your client, your manager is going to appreciate you going the extra mile and doing this. Okay, so now that we've created prototype 1, prototype 2, and we've played around with variations, the last thing I'm going to leave you with is creating a beautiful font stack. And creating fonts or searching for fonts for that matter is usually a tricky part. And it also comes with experience. So the more you do it, the better you get at it. Now, with that said, let's jump into it. I'm going to start with prototype design 1. I'm going to zoom in and we're going to start with this heading right here. Now, when it comes to fonts, it can be super overwhelming because there's so many to choose from. Where do you actually begin? Now, one thing I normally do, or what I like to do for that matter, is start with Google Fonts. If I don't get anything at Google Fonts, I move on to perhaps Creative Cloud or anything like that. So let's use Google Font in this example. I already found a font that I really, really like, and it is a font called Thredoka. And I found it by scrolling through. And the reason why I really like it is because of the rounded edges. I really feel like it's going to be great for this specific yoga design. So the good thing about Figma is Google Fonts is already baked into Figma itself, which makes it super easy to use the font itself. So we're going to take the first design prototype. We're going to take this heading, the first one, and we're going to change enter. And I'm just going to type in free or FRE, and we're going to select Fredoka right there. Now, off the bat, this is way, way, way too thick for my liking. So I'm going to change this, and let's start with regular. No, that's too thin. Let's go with medium. And last but not least, I want to change the actual space between each letter. Just want to space that out a little bit, maybe to about that point. Let's look at our prototype. Yeah, that looks really, really good. Now I'm going to add an extra little feature. I'm going to take fitness always, this part right here, and we're going to remove the actual full, and I'm going to add a stroke to it. We're going to add a stroke of about 3. Now it's going to do it for all of it. And to get around this, we're just going to undo it, undo everything we did here, and we are going to cut this. We're going to hit back. I'm just going to change the actual spacing again. And once that's done, we are going to duplicate this guy and we are going to paste fitness always. I'm going to take both of these. We're going to group it in together again. We're going to activate auto layout and we're going to decrease the space between them. And with that done, we're going to take our second font or our second text and we're going to quickly apply our fill. So I'm going to change this to 3 and we're also going to change the color. I'm going to use a property that we already have from Bootstrap and we're going to apply that. Let's have a look at how that looks like. Okay, we are super close. I just want to add a little bit more spacing to it, so perhaps about there. And when it does that, we need to change the fixed and we just want to change it to hug. There we go. Okay, so that is another option, but there's too much space. So we just want to fine tune it just a tiny bit. So I'm just going to decrease this a tiny bit and I'm going to select, I'm just going to change this frame 1 to heading, by the way. I'm going to select the auto layout. I'm just going to decrease the actual space between them, the gap. And I'm going to take yoga and I'm just going to decrease the font on that one as well. Just see how that looks like. So that is an option. Definitely going to give that as a variation, but I'm probably not going to lead with this one. Again, it's all about creativity, right? So with that done, we are going to undo this part. I'm just going to leave it at that size for now. And I'm going to decrease this font just a tiny bit, see if that makes it any better. Font and anything, any type of design, it's all about playing around until you get something that looks really good. Last thing, I'm just going to decrease this to about 2 and we're going to leave that for now. And I'm going to do and apply this font to our second design as well, but I'm going to keep it as is. So we're going to change this. We're going to call it Redoka and we're just going to change the bold to medium. And I want to see how that looks like. So we're just going to go to the next design. So a lot of space in between. Now we can separate it like we did with the other one, but we can also change the actual line height just to adjust the actual space between the wording or below or next to the wording or below the wording. There we go. So let's see how that looks like. That looks pretty good. So let's apply the Fredoka to the rest of the headings. So I'm going to click on this one and we can detach this and we're going to change it and we're going to call Fredoka. We're going to search Fredoka and we're going to change our bold to medium. All right, and I like the color. The color should be fine. We're going to do the same for this one. And actually, to speed up time, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to select all of them at once. And we're going to make our change right off the bat. All right, so once everything is selected, we're going to detach it. We're going to change it to our new font. And we are just going to make it medium. Let's see how that looks like. So this looks really nice. I really like this font, the super rounded on the headings. I still like to use the other font than the other ones. And again, with anything, with any type of design, it is all about playing around until you get something that works really, really nice. So what is the take on this? Well, the take is play around with your fonts. Make sure to check out all the fonts. I use personally, by the way, I use ChatGPT and I ask it a bunch of questions and it will provide me some good fonts that can be used. So really a cool idea. Last but not least, I am going to take our second design. I found another font that I kind of like. Maybe it's going to look good, maybe not. And I'm going to zoom in on our third one. By the way, Figma, we changed our 2 to 3, which is cool. And we're going to select this. And as I was typing in Fredoka, I found a font that it's a little controversial for sure, but I really like it. It definitely looks good. It's this one right here. And I'm just going to change this so it hugs. So we have it on 1 or 2 lines for that matter. And I'm just going to increase the space a little bit. And I am going to make it quite darker. And that is another example that you can give to the client. That might be hard to read, but again, that's completely up to the client. But that looks different. It looks good. All right, so in this entire video, which is a super long video, we created and designed an entire website from scratch. And the reason why I created this video, and by the way, it took forever, is because there is no other video out there that shows you how to design a website specifically for Bootstrap and the Bootstrap framework. So everything that we've done here, by the way, is in the description. I mean, the design files, the media, everything is there for you to use. It's free to use. I also took the design and I dropped it on the Figma community. So go ahead and you can download, duplicate, and make use of this design as you please. And so the next thing that I'm going to do, the next thing I'm going to create, the next video for that matter, is I'm going to create a video that focuses on taking this design and moving it into development. So I want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time to watch the entire video. Make sure to like and subscribe to the video because I'm going to drop the next video where I take this and I develop this in Docker, in Visual Studio Code, using GitHub, all the good stuff. We're going to physically develop this whole design into one concept, into one solution that's going to work for you. So make sure, again, to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon.